Hello and welcome back to Karma Stories. I'm Rob and I hope you are having a wonderful day today. Today I have a 3-hour compilation of malicious compliance stories for you. This is a whole bunch of previous episodes from the channel that we've put together in one place so that you don't need to change your episode and can go about what you're doing over the course of your day. Whether you're working or driving or just doing things around your house, this is 3 hours of malicious compliance to help you get through your day. Alright, on to the stories. Let's jump right in. This story comes to us from Throwaway Wine Guy. You want wine? I'll give you wine. Probably not the dunk I think it is, but I still feel happy with the result. For context, I work as a salesman in a wine store. It's not a normal wine and liquor place, it's a curated selection, meaning we pick out all the wine that we sell. This is irregular in retail. Most selections are curated by the distributor. As a result, all of the employees have to really know their crap, and we are regularly asked a lot of questions and need to give detailed and honest answers. Our customer base really likes us, and new customers are either pleasantly surprised by the experience or endlessly mad we don't carry their name brand thing they like. Damn you, Whispering Angel. The other day, a couple came into the store at the recommendation of a friend. I will call them A and B. A was very excited and was super happy when we had the bottles they had taken pictures of at a party the other day. B, however, immediately started making comments like, "Really? That one?" Or, "That tasted awful, you want that?" A was clearly a little upset at this, but I gathered this was just a normal dynamic in their relationship as it was brushed off rather quickly. After we put those bottles aside, they tell me they are going to do a garden party since it's warm. Nice sunny day, light apps and snacks, average spring party. So they asked me to recommend some wine, and I start going through the store and showing them some options. I hit all the big guys, a good selection for the food they had described. Well, B did not think so. Every suggestion I made was met with a counter. I show them a nice floral, unoaked white burgundy. I think we should do Chablis. Pinot Noir, don't you think Pinot is too heavy? Sauvignon Blanc, too sweet. Albarino, too heavy. At this point, I'm at a loss. I'm running out of stuff to give B, so I scale up a bit, offer some fuller bodied wines. Not great pairing to the event or the food, but not destructive. B is still not happy. A is clearly pissed at this point. They've been holding their tongue, but every denial makes their face a darker shade of red until they finally pop. A apologizes to me and says they're going to go with my suggestions and tells B that they can pick out a bottle they want because clearly they're not willing to listen to me. I go through and put their cart together, listen to them argue a bit at the register, and then check B out after A storms out of the store. Whatever, I'm free of it. A is a saint for dealing with B. It's done. It was not done. The next morning when I show up, B is waiting for me with the 3 bottles they picked. Got 3 of the same thing. "The wine is off," B says, holding the bottle out like it's some sort of weird bug. I tell them, yeah, it happens sometimes, I'll check it out. To be clear, it is rare that the wine is actually off. Most of the time the customer just doesn't like it. It doesn't hurt us and we want the business, so we always accept exchanges and just agree that it wasn't right. The customer has been right twice that I have seen, and I was one of the 2 customers, compromised cork. So I open up the store with an impatient B standing over me before finally taking the bottle. I kid you not, this thing is like 80 degrees. It is hot. The sun hasn't been out long enough to do this either, so I'm pretty confident they did something to it. Anyway, I pour myself a glass and taste it. Even through the mire of hot booze, I can tell it's good. All of the flavors I expect stand out. It smells fine. No evidence of oxidizing or mildew. Good bottle. Feeling petty, I tell B as much, wanting them to admit that they just don't like the wine. B turns a bit red and says as much. Good. Let's pick something else out then. "Where are your Super Tuscans?" B asks. I light up because this is the perfect chance to F with them. We have 2 true ones in the store. One is a very accessible price, pretty standard, really nice, and medium bodied. Wouldn't be too bad for the garden party, but still on the heavier end. The other, expensive as heck. It's the inkiest, blackest, heaviest wine you could imagine. I love it, but I think it might kill anyone who drinks it in 80-degree weather. Well, I give B the heavy one. B, of course, is in love when I tell them about it. Big, bold flavors, heavy, crushes the flavor of whatever you eat it with, perfect for B. They get 3 to replace the bottles they returned, and end up spending an extra $130 even, with the cost of the refunded wine deducted. Now, I know I'm way more sensitive to wine and food than others are, but this was perfect. Even somebody who's demolished their palate with years of cigar smoking would be able to tell that wine is awfully paired. I'm happy knowing B is going to get some weird looks from their guests and a tongue lashing from A. And B is happy with the bottle of grape-based olive oil they now own. Compliance given maliciously. Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called Psychological15416. It says, I just hope this doesn't end up reflecting poorly on the shop when B goes, oh, well this is what I was suggested to get from the shop. Thankfully, A not being a butthole should balance that out. I think everybody who knows B is probably very familiar with how B acts and just how much of a butthole they are. So when they get that really thick wine from B and they realize that it's not right for what they're eating, they're just going to realize that somebody pulled one over on B and probably have a laugh about it. Because if you think about it, B isn't the kind of person just to say, I got this from this store. They're going to be the kind of people that say, I got something else from this store and it was horrible, so I went back and they recommended this. This is supposed to be wonderful. My coworker didn't like that my friend and I were quietly chatting, so I took her demand for silence very literally and made sure she hated every second of it. This story comes to us from Ren is Existing. Coworker didn't like my friend and I quietly chatting while working. Made it her problem. I, 21 female, work in a pharmacy as a pharmacy technician along with my friend. We were both chatting about next semester and what classes we were taking while filling medications. My older coworker, 41 female, loudly shouts, let's play the quiet game with just you two and see who can go without talking for 25 minutes, very rudely. All of my other coworkers were shocked as our talking was not bothering them and we had no patience at the time. So I decided to comply, but in her rigorous standards. I stopped talking to her, period. I only respond if talked to first, and only if it is about work. I also do not talk to her once clocked out, as she complains about fraternizing with higher members of management outside of work hours. She is a lead tech, so she is higher. She hates it, keeps trying to talk to me, but I only respond with, is it about work, and move on. She is the only one I do it to. It's fun. This coworker has a streak of being rude and overly harsh and not apologizing. It's nice to give her a taste of her own medicine. OP added a bunch of edits down at the bottom of this one. The first one says, most pharmacies call the people they help patients. It's a policy. You can ask most and they'll agree. Thank you. The next edit says, I think some of you guys are misinterpreting this. Our pharmacy is a loud one. We talk a lot, and so does she. She is a chatterbox just like the rest of us. That's why me not talking to her is pissing her off, even though she is the one who wanted it. Our patients love us talking and joking around, and know that we are serious with patient care. Also, a lot of our bad reviews are because of her and another older coworker. She is a hard worker but is rude to both patients and coworkers alike. The next edit says, y'all are missing the point. This coworker is rude to everyone, not just me. That includes patients and coworkers. She also talks a lot, and our pharmacy would not have as good of ratings as it does if we weren't a talkative and joyful pharmacy. I was speaking quietly to the point it shocked my other coworkers when she called me out. The next edit says, I have responded to all I could, but thank you to those who actually understand that this was a last resort for her to be nicer. I genuinely love my job. The people that I see at my job mostly are so amazing. Most of my coworkers are so fun, the patients are kind, interesting, and funny, the pay is great, and so is the scheduling with my classes. I have worked my butt off to try and keep it that way, fun and inviting. I am hoping to have a one-on-one with her soon, and try and, for the last time, get her to see reason. I love my job, and I don't want the happiness of the others to tank due to her. OP's final edit says, I really don't understand how people don't know what a loud pharmacy looks like. Is your local one dead or something? Many of my coworkers, rude one included, joke around and talk a ton. I've seen them almost pee themselves from laughing. The patients enjoy our shenanigans. Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called A-Spark. It says, this is great malicious compliance, but you should consider talking to HR about this as well. If someone at work said, let's play the quiet game to me like I was 5, I'm definitely saying something to HR. OP responded and said, sadly, we have talked to HR and the higher-ups an abundance of times, but nothing ever gets done. She will get nicer for a few days and then continue on. OP, I understand this person has been there longer than you and that gives them seniority, but sometimes people like that just need to be put into their place. So saying something to them like, I'm not a child and you're not a teacher, so if we're bothering you at all, you can address us in a grown-up manner. And honestly, if you don't want to have that discussion with her personally, then go to somebody higher up than her and tell them what's going on, and they can have that conversation with her for you. My teacher was obsessed with enforcing the dress code, so I followed her rules in the most disruptive, unforgettable way possible. This story comes to us from mwood60, Mrs. Evans, keeper of the dress code. This all happened about 20 years ago when I was in 7th grade, 12 to 13 years old for those not in the US school system. I remember this day vividly, as it was one of my most rebellious actions against authority I had done in my school years. My 7th grade science teacher was a curmudgeonly lady that we will call Mrs. Evans. Now, Mrs. Evans had no joys in her job of teaching preteens the foundations of science, but did enjoy sending students to the principal for minor infractions. An easy way of getting sent to the principal was through dress code violations. Throughout the entirety of the school year with her, I'd seen Mrs. Evans send no less than 75% of the class to the principal's office for dress code violation, with most being the girls in the class wearing shirts that were too revealing because their shoulders were showing, with the others usually being something easily fixed like wearing a hat. I showed up to class in my standard outfit that I had been wearing up to that point in the school year, a t-shirt and jeans. However, being the outdoorsy kid I was, I had a slight tear on the knee of one of the pant legs. Mrs. Evans honed in on this slight tear and instructed me that I would need to be wearing jeans without a tear in them for her to be able to teach her class without distraction, and to go to the principal if I was unable to do so. Being a smart butt 13-year-old, I decided to comply by going to my locker, getting my stapler out, and stapling the tear shut on my jeans. Upon return to class, this was not good enough for Mrs. Evans, keeper of the dress code. She repeated her previous instruction and said that if I returned without the torn jeans being replaced, I was going to the principal. Cue compliance number 2. I went straight back to my locker, got a pair of scissors out, and cut off the entire leg of the jeans with the offending tear, much to my mother's later dismay. Upon my return to class, Mrs. Evans was quite unhappy. The rest of the class was now properly distracted from her doing, much to her chagrin. But Mrs. Evans was the keeper of the code for a reason, one supposed. She cited a line in the school handbook stating, "No phrase on any clothing allowed." This time, I was sent to the principal. I had never gotten in too much trouble in school, was in a lot of advanced placement courses, and played football and track for school, so my record was pretty clean. The principal was confused as to why I was sent, until I told him I'd just come from Mrs. Evans' class, which told him enough after he saw one pant leg normal with the other pant leg completely cut below the knee. He told me to please just wear my gym shorts and have this be the end of it. Cue compliance number 3, I returned to class wearing my gym shorts for the day, wearing them over the offending jeans. Mrs. Evans, keeper of the code, decided this warranted a call to the principal from the class phone to report me and get me into further turmoil. However, I think the principal was just done with getting his time wasted that day. After Mrs. Evans got him on the phone and spoke her piece, there was a long silence while he assumably responded to her. She then hung up the phone, her face slightly flushed, and proceeded with the lesson. I never once got called out on any dress code violations by the keeper of the code for the remainder of my middle school years. Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called Real Ultimate Papo. It says, glad the principal told her off like she deserved. Did you ever get an apology, or did she continue being a curmudgeonly turd? OP responded and said, laugh out loud, well, I cannot confirm what was said between her and the principal, but that is the assumption. I can only imagine how many other students had actual issues he was being distracted from, including an arson attempt by one that same year. Nope, I never got an apology, and honestly, I don't think I really deserved it. I was technically out of dress code, as asinine as it was, and was obviously being a smart but hormonal, rebellious preteen. She continued to be curmudgeonly throughout the entirety of middle school though, with her being one of the least liked teachers in the school. Hey OP, you could have taken this one a little bit further. Your pants didn't have to be frayed. When you cut them off, you could have made them into a nice pair of jean shorts, and you could have used your stapler to hem up the bottom so they couldn't see any of the frays. That would have worked out, right? New manager insisted the rules were followed to the letter, so OP did, and now they get to work from home forever. This story comes to us from Eastwood Norris. I can't come in late? Okay, I'll get disability permission. Last summer, I got a new manager that I reported directly to at work. She had decades of good experience, but none as a manager of people, and it turns out she was awful at it. She was given about a month to learn the ropes before I was passed off from reporting to the director to her. For that meeting, she mentioned that I needed to be on site 3 days a week, clocking in on site at my scheduled time. I had been coming in 1 or 2 times weekly for nearly 18 months, and often while clocking in at home. I also communicated that I had started going through some yet-to-be-diagnosed gut issues that made my mornings especially unpleasant. Those details fell on deaf ears, and I was told, come in at your scheduled times or get an ADA exemption. Well, B, I'll call that bluff. I started the ADA process. Within a matter of weeks, I had documented permission to clock in from home every day at my personal discretion. Plus, a couple months later, I was diagnosed with moderate to severe ulcerative colitis. This manager thankfully didn't want to be doing this job and left recently after about 9 months. But I get to keep clocking at home every day until the heat death of the universe thanks to their callous attitude and general indifference to my discomfort. Lucky me. OP added an edit down at the bottom. It says edit to add a little context to elaborate since I communicated poorly in the title and didn't clarify in the body. We were on a hybrid schedule, which I was told by our director a year prior did not in fact require us to be in person even 1 day a week, just on site when necessary. I had been clocking in at home consistently and coming to the site as needed, which had not been an issue with my previous manager, or the director, who I was directly reporting to for 9 months while they were searching for a replacement. I worded the title poorly. I was not clocking in late, I was simply clocking in remotely and arriving on site later in the day, commuting during 20 minutes of what would have typically been lunch or break time. I was still working 8 hours and have been late a single-digit number of times in over 2.5 years in this position. Getting an ADA exemption was more nebulous because my health concern was yet to be diagnosed. This manager was a micromanager with trust issues. I can appreciate that getting an ADA exemption was best for everyone, but they also were giving me absolutely no leeway or understanding without it. I wasn't receiving a random, unspoken exemption before, and they weren't just following policy, they were being a controlling butt. I look at this one a little bit from the manager side and see an employee who has a different schedule than other people that work in the office. They had something worked out with the previous management, but this is new management, and if they want you to be into the office because you're supposed to be in the office, then that's what the rules are. So yeah, getting the ADA thing for OP was the best idea possible because it allowed them to continue the arrangement they had previously. Actually, it made it even better because then they could stay and work from home whenever they wanted. Without that paperwork, they just had a different schedule on some words between them and a previous manager, which doesn't sound all that fair to everybody else who works there. Have you ever had a boss so obsessed with control that they ignore every warning and then act shocked when it all blows up in their face? Yeah, that's exactly what's happened here. This story comes to us from Jollybad7892. Stick to the schedule. A few years ago, I was hired as a head of bar operations at a new restaurant opening. A hugely successful, even if quite average restaurant group opening a new 3-floor, 280-seater restaurant. The opening was a bit of a crap show. I was drafted in late as they fired a lot of opening managers, which should have been a red flag big enough for me to pass on the opportunity, really. One of my many responsibilities was to write the rota schedule for our 30-odd bar staff. There were a few stipulations I had to stick to. Importantly, that I had to have a manager from the bar side on duty at all times. After a few weeks of doing so, a new area manager was hired who took over from the general manager on day-to-day operations. One of the things he implemented was that he would write the rotas and just generally micromanage. He subsequently uploads a rota when in the first week there were 2 days without a manager on duty. I highlighted this to him in person, where I was pretty rudely told to just do my job and work with what was passed down to me. In turn, I decided to email him, the general manager, and one of the company directors, explaining the issue and how it must just be an oversight, but attached a new proposed set of rotas that would fix the issue. The next day, the new area manager pins me in the office and again tells me how I'm going above my station and should just do my effing job and adhere to the rota. He said he'd amended and sorted it all, so I did. The following day is my day off. There was no manager on duty and a general lack of staff in the building. My phone starts going off from 8 a.m. and about 2 p.m. I decided to respond to some of the messages and highlight how I was doing what I was told. The next day, the area manager requests a sit-down meeting with a witness and fires me, something he didn't have approval to do given I don't report to him. I get my dismissal paperwork via email and naturally say I have some issue with it due to the reasons I've outlined and have the receipts to prove it. I ended up getting a pretty decent payout due to being unfairly dismissed. Another few days later, the new area manager has moved on from the business with immediate effect. I don't think he was able to find work throughout most of COVID subsequently. Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called Lily Sinclair. It says, classic case of play stupid games, win expensive consequences. You warned them, followed orders to the letter, and let their own incompetence do the firing. Beautifully done. This is just another case of a manager who thinks that they're the big fish in the little pond and that they have to do everything, even though there's people there that have done that job a lot longer than they have and actually know what they're doing. I mean, come on. We know that a good manager is one that actually listens to their staff and works with them to get things done. That's obviously not what was happening in this case. OP, it sucks you got fired by somebody who didn't have the authority to do it in the first place, but I'm glad to hear you got a payout. When your boss starts micromanaging basic human needs like drinking water or using the bathroom, there's only one thing to do: bring a doctor's note and make their life way more complicated. This story comes to us from OwnDragonfly942. Permission to drink water? Okay. I worked in fast fashion retail for 9 years on the tills. Every year, roughly, the store manager would decide that water bottles weren't allowed behind the tills, and we needed permission to go upstairs to have some. It would only last a couple of weeks before it became too hot in the summer, and the rules changed back. The last time she tried putting this in place, I'd been diagnosed with diabetes, and my vertigo had finally been recognized by my doctor. The main factors of both being, if I get too hot or don't have water, I can faint. I got told by my line manager, who's under the store manager, that I needed a written note from my doctor saying I needed it, and until that time, I couldn't have it with me. So I took a week off work saying it was causing health issues while I waited for my doctor to write me up a letter. I went back and had a sickness meeting with my line manager, and before sitting down, I passed her this letter, still in the sealed envelope. On the letter it said, £10 charge before giving to patient, and my manager looked horrified that I'd actually paid £10 to do what I'd been asked, as evidenced by herself. At the time, my hourly wage was $9.50 and I didn't get paid for sick days, so that £10 letter ended up costing a week's wage too. The best part, in the letter, it was stated that I could use the toilets whenever I needed without asking, another rule, and could have a quick 5 to 10 minute paid break when I needed to check my sugars and have a snack or anything as needed. So I started doing exactly that. Even when I had a good day and I didn't need the snack, I went upstairs to just escape. This went on for about 3 years until I quit last year. The store manager, as far as I know, has never implemented the water bottle rule again or limited when employees can take toilet breaks. Apart from things like this, the store manager is a nice-ish woman, so it was always out of character when it came about. I still have a copy of the letter in case my current employer tries anything, but they're a pretty decent lot, so no worries there. There's other things from this place, but this one always stands out to me. Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called Venusian Cyber Sleuth. It says, "It's really effed up when a boss thinks they can dictate their employees' bodily functions." Another commenter called Dendrocolamidicus said, "What is the malicious compliance here? They asked you to get a doctor's note, and you maliciously effed yourself out of a week's pay and a tenner to comply? Honestly, don't really get the impression you stuck it to them here. You got screwed over complying with their ridiculous instructions, and they lost nothing." Alright listeners, I'm curious to know what you think in this one. Was it malicious compliance or was it not? Do you think that OP just screwed themselves over, or they actually got the message through to the boss that was trying to force them not to have water at the front desk? When leadership refuses to listen to the person who actually knows how the system works, sometimes the best move is to let them fail, very slowly, until they beg for help. This story comes to us from aggravating.5217. Sometimes people know what they are talking about. Here we have an IT story. One of my many tasks is to create specific document templates that will be used by the company to show off achievements. For some unknown reason, those that are in the higher-up suites decided to change the look of the certificates. I am given a copy of the certificate and told to update the system that will do the printing. I start off by taking the existing certificate and try to match the new certificate to the template. After much frustration, I decide that I will have to start over and spend some time redesigning the document template from scratch. It takes a bit longer than I expected, and when I did my first prints, the various fields were out of line. This is tedious work as it means checking, moving the elements by little increments. I get everything aligned except for the date, and no matter what I try, the date will not move up or down. I ask some of the guys in our development department and none of them can figure this one out. We are all stumped. I do some research and discover that the problem is the renderer, the program that takes the template and inserts the data for those non-IT people. One of the issues that it raised is that the renderer has a bug that will move items around at random, and unless placed in a fixed location, will just keep on changing the template. The changes are very minute, probably no more than 1 or 2 millimeters. I send the higher-ups an email explaining all of this after. I had reached a serious point of frustration, as this task should have taken about half a day, and I've now been at it for 2 days. I send my boss an email explaining what the problem is, and if they may know somebody that can help. Next thing, I'm called into a Teams meeting with the higher-ups and asked what the problem is. I explain everything. The higher-ups tell me to open the original template and we will redo that to match the new certificate. I follow instruction and keep adding my few cents worth. I'm then told to do what I am told and get on with it. I'm also told that I must stop any other work. Now comes the malicious compliance part. I do as I am told, make the changes as requested. We work line by line and make the changes. We then check that the change is correct on the certificate. I am asked to print the completed template document to the printer in their office. No problem, I do as I'm told. I stop responding to emails, doing other work while waiting for the people from the other office to do their thing, and tell me what the next set of changes are. This goes on for nearly a week. The higher-ups are losing their mind because every time we change one thing, other things go out of alignment, and we need to go back and fix them. When I'm not sitting at my desk looking at my computer screen, I am doing a bit of research to see if I can find a solution, but not saying anything to anyone. Remember what I was told. I'm having dinner with the family and mention this to my son. He is a software developer. He asks if he can look at the code and tells me that the code that I had been working on for the higher-ups is seriously wrong. He gives me some tips on how to fix it so that the elements are locked in and will not move. I sit down in just over an hour. I produce a new set of code that needs to be tested to see if it is robust enough. Now for the outcome. Today I go into the office, get pulled into a Teams meeting again to continue with the product that isn't working. I make a passing comment that my son helped me with the template and has put in more robust settings. The higher-ups reluctantly agree to try, as they say we have nothing to lose. We made the first print and one of the items was out of alignment, made a change, and the item held its position. Took a few hours and the template is now working like it's supposed to. I even got a well done from the higher-ups. Sometimes there are others who know what they are talking about. Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a very common commenter called CoderJoe1. It says, I doubt they learned anything from this experience. Another commenter down below called Anna V said, your son hopefully learned an important lesson. He helped a big company, which then proceeded to thank someone else. Your son didn't get a penny, you didn't get a penny, but the company saved big time by getting you back to work and out of that doomed project. Yeah, I'm not sure really what OP proved in this situation because all they did was tell the higher-ups that their son figured it out and that OP wasn't competent enough to figure it out themselves. OP, I would have taken that credit for myself and not brought my son into the equation, and I would probably compensate my son on my own to let them know how appreciative I was that they figured out what the issue was. Your son doesn't work for that company, they don't need praise from that company, but they're your son and they helped you, so that is completely on you. If someone is trying to sabotage you at work, don't argue. Just document everything, especially when your boss is a former Navy SEAL who knows how to strike back. This story comes to us from CJ Dubé. Documentation will save your cookies. So, I was a contractor in a government office. My background is extensive, starting with multiple engineering degrees and many years of designing, building, and operation of remotely operated vehicles, ROVs. There was constant personnel churn in the office, and the contractors were the corporate memory. It's an interesting situation. I always likened it to a feudal society. Staffers, direct government employees were the royalty, and the contractors were the serfs. Sometimes it was bothersome, but the position paid very well, so that was some benefit. Most of the time, the staffers knew they were in way over their heads and gladly accepted our advice. A woman staffer arrived one day as head of the department that managed our outside service contractors. Typically, I played a large advisory role in dealing with these folks as someone familiar with the industry and able to call BS, if you will. Well, this woman decided that I was conspiring behind her back with the contractors virtually on the first day there. Why, I never knew, but it was what it was. Luckily, I didn't answer to her. I answered to a guy who in a former life was a member of SEAL Team 6. Basically, a trained killer. Great guy, he liked me a lot, and we got along well together. When the foo-foo started, he pulled me aside and said, document everything you do. So I did as he suggested. I had a notebook and OneNote that I would record whatever I did that involved this woman, including her increasingly antisocial behavior towards me. We would be in meetings, and not only would she not look at me when I asked her direct questions, she wouldn't answer. Sometimes this happened, and then there was this dead silence until someone else spoke. About this time, we got a new division manager who was very personnel sensitive. He was a PhD type in an operations role and completely out of his league, so he regressed to what he knew, making the office kinder and gentler. This was quite a challenge as we had an office full of ex-Navy types, and they weren't exactly used to being kinder and gentler. In a short period of time, the woman in question had skewered 5 other males in the office in her short tenure, with the result of them departing the office, both staff and contractors. I would have been her 6th if she had gotten her way. So there was a lot of concern about my position. My boss was in my office one day talking about the latest antisocial behavior demonstrated by this woman. He made a comment, "Boy, I wish I had documentation of all this." I laughed, went to my computer, and printed off a 20-page dissertation on all the stupidity. His eyes lit up. "Come with me," he said. We went into the office of the new director, and my boss gave him my dossier. It took him a bit to read through it all. I had used the word harassment, which turned out to be the magic word in description of many of the episodes. He said, "I think harassment is too strong a word for this behavior." I asked him if a contractor was exhibiting this behavior towards a staffer, what would you call it? He didn't answer the question. About a week later, the woman was reassigned to a different organization. I always say, it's not good to go head to head with a trained killer. Laugh out loud. Does anybody else feel like this is a recurring theme on these stories over and over and over again? Document everything, because you never know when you're going to need it, or, like in OP's case, when your boss is going to need it to get rid of somebody that's causing problems in the office. OP, I wish we got to see the look on your boss's face when you printed out all those papers with all of the dirt to get that person fired. That would have been amazing. This story comes to us from Flossing Horse 741. I should cancel on my end? No problem. I booked accommodation 2 months in advance for St. Patrick's weekend in Dublin. It was a fairly ancient B&B, but for €115, it was a place to sleep and cheapest option for the busiest weekend of the year in Dublin. It was one double bed for me and a buddy to share. It was pay on arrival. 3 weeks before the stay, the accommodation manager messaged me on the app I booked the stay on, telling me there's a problem, I can no longer stay, and to cancel on my side immediately. No apology, let alone help offered by them. This was followed by multiple phone calls daily, along with text messages in a harassing nature, saying I need to cancel now so I can get my money back. Once again, it was pay on arrival. I didn't answer the calls or messages telling me to cancel. Something felt off, so I checked the listing for the night I was supposed to stay, and it just so happens the accommodation had been listed again for double the price. Likely, the manager realized St. Patrick's weekend was a cash grab. Maybe not immediately, but at the property manager's request, I simply rang booking.com and told them I'd like to cancel my booking. The customer service rep asked why I was canceling. I explained in detail all the above to her, and things took an unexpected turn for the property manager. Ultimately, the rep agreed the property was acting in an unfair manner, and the solution was that booking.com would find me accommodation within 1 kilometer. Originally, they tried to get me to stay way outside of the city, but I wasn't having it. The original property would then be liable to cover any difference in cost. Here's the good part. Finding accommodation 3 weeks before St. Patrick's Day in Dublin is about as difficult as trying to light a fire with flint and steel in the rain. Near impossible. Everything within a 1 kilometer range was booked out, except for a well-known 4-star hotel. The room alone cost €350 per night, and had 2 double beds, much bigger room, and in a nicer location. The customer rep had to get it cleared by her team lead, so I just sat on hold doing chores for 25 minutes. Eventually, they came back and said it was all signed off on, and they'd send me a special link. What a treat! I gladly accepted their compromise. This in turn meant the property owner that tried to force me to cancel on my end was now indebted £235, and we got a massive upgrade for the same price we originally had. I had to pay the €350 up front and had to keep receipts and show proof of payment to the booking partner after our stay, but I got my refund of €235 the following week. Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called It's Shoo Shoo. It says, I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall when the property manager found out how much they screwed themselves, haha. OP responded and said, we had a good laugh about this while enjoying a fresh pint of Guinness in the bar of the hotel. Another commenter down below called Avid Learner said, sometimes you gotta shake things up a bit for the better, even if it takes a little persistence and a lucky break from the booking site. OP responded and said, exactly this. I spent about 3 hours in total on the phone to them over the course of a week, mostly on hold, but I work remotely. I was able to work away or do chores while I was on hold. Okay, does anybody else here feel like the original property owner still got what they wanted in this case? They made OP cancel, and OP did cancel. They were on the hook for a little bit more money, but I'm willing to bet you in those last couple of weeks before St. Patrick's Day in Dublin, they were able to rent out their place for a good amount times the amount that they were charged. Booking.com could have made this a really sore point for this property owner. They could have just said, nope, you're not able to book for that weekend because you said that the property is not available. That's why OP wasn't able to be there. But I guess that's not quite how this one turned out. You can warn someone all you want, but if they're determined to ignore expert advice, sometimes the best lesson comes with a 4-figure price tag. This story comes to us from Expert Magician 1531. The customer is always right. I work for a Nissan dealership as a vehicle technician, and I look after the high-performance vehicles, GTRs, 370Zs, and about 13 years ago, we fitted a set of front parking sensors to a Nismo 370Z, and they didn't work properly for some reason. These were Nissan branded sensors, and we had fitted them on many other vehicles with no issues. After a while, replacing the control unit and the sensors, they still refused to work correctly. So we got in touch with Nissan technical support, and found out from them that they don't work on the 370Zs and the GTRs, so please don't fit them. We had to replace the front bumper of the Nismo 370Z and take the expensive lesson on the chin. A few months later, we sold a new GTR to a, to put it mildly, aggressive customer that had to have things his way, and we were definitely perceived as the lower class. He wanted front parking sensors fitted to his new car, and the salesman let the order through to us. The sting of what had happened before was still there, and we told the salesman straight away that it's not a good idea, and to tell the customer that they will not work. The customer, knowing everything, stated that they will work and there's no reason why they shouldn't. He's had them on previous vehicles and wants them fitted, and at a reduced price for the stress we caused, telling him he can't have what he wants. So we fit them. They don't work great, but do to a degree, and we tell the customer that we warned him they wouldn't. He took the car away and was back in a couple of days, saying it was unacceptable and we need to get them working correctly, or he will cause a big stink on social media and get his lawyer involved. So we spent a week tinkering with the car and no joy. They just wouldn't work right. By now, he's ringing in every day to see if they are fixed. We would say, sorry sir, as we were told by Nissan, and pass that information on to you, they won't work on your vehicle. You were advised strongly not to have them. So he wants them removed, and to fit them, you need to put holes in the very expensive bumper. Obviously, he isn't happy with the 4 holes in the front of his car, and demands a new bumper from us. Luckily, all calls are recorded at our dealership, and we had him on call requesting sensors to be fitted despite our advice. We refused to replace it for free. He stormed off threatening lawsuits. A few weeks later, it's back for a new expensive bumper at his cost. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, we have one from a user called Comb Jellies Are Cool. It says, if that was me, I'd be embarrassed enough to buy the bumper at a different dealership across town. If only there were some kind of signal that these people were going to act this way when they came in. But I think we all know that these kinds of people never use their signals anyway, right? I think we also need to take a moment to acknowledge the fact that when a customer's treating you like crap, you should definitely be allowed to refuse service to that customer. Like, hey, we told you how this was going to go, and it went that way. We're done dealing with you now. You can get it fixed somewhere else. Have a nice day. We've seen some very unhinged workplace meltdowns on this channel, but this one starts with a screaming shift lead and ends with one of the most bizarre walkouts I've ever read. This story comes to us from Wonderful Rule 2515. If you don't want to be here, then leave, because I don't need you. The shift lead who said it, Adriana, 20-something, tried to get me fired after dismissing me from my shift. I got the job at 16 because I was dating one of the other shift leads. Already off to a terrible start, I know. My boyfriend was one of those characters that people either loved or hated. Mostly hated if you come from a loving home, because he was admittedly a terrible person. And Adriana especially hated him. I'm sure she had her reasons. One Saturday morning, I showed up to work to find Adriana yammering about my boyfriend calling out that day. He didn't tell me he was calling out, and since Adriana was visibly upset already about his absence, I texted him to ask what's up. Why did you call out? Adriana is really mad about being short-staffed on a Saturday, and now she's going to be yelling at me about it all shift. My boyfriend was a real crap stirrer, and I was somehow incredibly effing oblivious to this at the time. I texted him mostly to vent, but of course, he used this as an excuse to start an argument with Adriana. He texted her something accusing her of talking crap, which for the record, I did not say she was doing, and I can hear from the kitchen, she immediately started yelling into oblivion about how if I have something to say, I should say it to her face, and how I'm a stupid effing dumb bee. Literally so effing stupid. This bee is the dumbest girl I've ever met. Why are you even with him? So valid, queen. I was a little dense back then, I guess. Amidst her tirade about how stupid she thinks I am, she comes into the office where I'm eating my pre-shift breakfast of Boston Market macaroni in total silence. This whole time, I was just disassociating into my Mac, because what the ever-loving F else would I do? Not only did I come from a home where yelling often led to me dodging flying lamps and drawers, but I was genuinely scared she'd have her cousin jump me if I pissed her off, well before this even happened. So she's standing there, I'm eating, kinda smiling out of discomfort, just watching her tear into me even more about my intelligence. Why? Because my boyfriend called out of work. It was honestly so bizarre, had escalated so quickly, and I was so disassociated. Life kind of felt like it was moving in slow motion in that moment. She eventually says the magic line that snapped me out of my disassociation and freed me from my wage slave chains that lovely Saturday morning. If you don't want to be here, then leave, because I don't need you. Now again, this is Saturday morning at a Pizza Hut that is already short-staffed. I knew for a fact that she was BSing not needing me, but I also knew that she said it right in front of the office cameras. So I'm thinking, that sounded like an approval to leave early, didn't it? Especially after being effing berated for 15 minutes straight as soon as I walked in the door for something I didn't even do. She later tried to get me fired for walking out of my shift, and the first thing I did was tell the general manager to check the cameras. I should have just let them fire me, honestly. Adriana, if you're out there, I live every day thanking God that I didn't have to experience a phase of life that included screaming at 16-year-old girls first thing in the morning at my big fancy Pizza Hut shift lead job. I heard you also got fired for assaulting a customer. It's okay. I understand that being a shift lead at Pizza Hut is a very high-stakes environment to be working in. No, really, you don't look insane at all screaming your head off inside a fast food joint on a nearly daily basis. Completely sane and very intelligent behavior right there. Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called AbleWay16. It says, "Glad you stood up for yourself. You handled that way better than most people would. Toxic managers like that don't deserve good employees like you. No one deserves to be treated like that." OP responded and said, "I'm a lot quicker to tell people to shove it these days." Unfortunately, at such a young age in a workplace, we just take a lot of the crap that the managers hand down to us because we really don't know what our options are at that point. We're young, we're naive, and we need the job and enjoy the money that we get from it. So we put up with a whole bunch of crap that we really don't need to. Labor laws and worker rights really should be taught in high school. Some neighbors just can't help themselves, but when one guy threw a full-blown tantrum over a chicken coop, the response was both petty and perfectly legal. This story comes to us from Diverse Voltron. You want to throw a fit over the property line? No problem. So I bought a house in 2018. I had to in a hurry so I could get my mother in my old home before her chemo got intense. My family had outgrown the one we were in, and we found one that needed some work but had 5¼ acres and a chicken coop. Neighbor, Dan, obsessively manicures his property, and it is much nicer as a result, but the price and features work for us on our side. We fix up and paint the chicken coop, only interrupted once by Dan asking us to tear it down or move it. Surely the coop was well on our side of the property line, I thought. I politely declined and described how the only thing I'd be doing is building an enclosed run towards my house to protect the birds from predators after fixing some things inside the house that have been neglected. The previous owner was a serious alcoholic and there's a lot of work to do. Dan walks away angry but defeated. A couple of years pass and the run is built exactly as described, and our informal survey shows the property line about 20 feet back, and I build gardens roughly the same distance from the property line. Dan has a survey done that suspiciously puts the back corner of the coop and about 1/3 of the run over the property line, but we agreed that it could stay so long as I don't encroach any further, and I eventually move it, which was my actual plan. He said to take all the time I need, declining my offers to buy the dirt or trade easements and reimburse him for the cost of the survey. Another year goes by and Dan has changed his tune. He interrupts a target practice session with my 2 foster kids to demand that I demolish the coop and run soon, to which I said I suppose I could push that project up to next fall, 2024. He isn't happy but seems pacified. I wasn't thrilled either, but I'm a reasonable guy and would prefer to have a good relationship with a neighbor I don't like much. Enter May 2024, 6 months before I agreed to do anything, and this guy shows up in my backyard wanting to talk about the gosh darn coop again. You know, Dan, you said I could have all the time I needed and then demanded I tear it down, going back on your cue the most childish temper tantrum I think I've ever seen. He was literally stomping on the ground with elbows out, screaming about suing me and how he'll own my whole house by the time he's done with me. Malicious Compliance. F you, Dan. I decided the best place for that coop is exactly where it is. It's been there about 20 years, and adverse possession only requires 10. I can take that 12 square feet of dirt from you, and you'll even have to pay my legal fees. Only the run needs to move since it's only been there 5 years. That's exactly what I did. The new run connects to the gardens, and the roof funnels the rooster's crows right to his house. Setback requirements say structures must be 5 feet from property lines. The back corner of the run is now exactly 5 feet 2 inches away from the supposed property line, and he gets to hear and smell my chickens every time he's outside. He will not have peace until he dies or moves. I am well within my rights, and while I do struggle with medical and PTSD issues from my service, I learned very well from the Navy how to be technically correct in a way that only works for me. Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called Shadowlace366. It says, honestly, removing 12 square feet of competition with legal precision is elite tier pettiness. Dan underestimated someone with Navy training and property law knowledge. OP responded and said, yeah, he really should have made the previous owner remedy the issue before the sale. There's a lot of legal precedent in that. I guess they were good friends though, laugh out loud. Another commenter down below called Denver Pilot said, good story. You keep saying supposed property line. Why not get a surveyor out, preferably while Dan is on vacation? He doesn't even need to know you surveyed, and find out. If it goes in your favor, you'll have papers to wave in his face whenever you feel like watching an adult throw a hissy fit again. OP, this last commenter has the right suggestion. You need to get your own survey done, even if it's just to confirm the one that the neighbor had done. Also, maybe get a couple of different people out to do it, because if you get the guy that they had out and they were friends with that guy, you're probably going to lose some space. Also, I think it might be time to double up on the amount of chickens you have, just because you really like eggs, right? This story comes to us from Chris Cam Love. No earphones, only office-wide music? Got it, operations manager. This happened roughly 6 years ago when I was still working as a technical writer. But I remembered this story when I was reading a post in here about a manager fresh off his leadership training, or something, which reminded me of the time when a new operations manager was hired to supervise and manage operations. That is, to oversee writers writing articles, legal or business documents, editors, etc. Needless to say, after he was hired, it was a bunch of endless work huddles where everyone is mandated to join, even when you're trying to catch a deadline, and new and absurd rules, one of which was no wearing of headphones while working. Instead, each group or team can choose the music for the day. Why? Apparently wearing headphones gives off the impression that we are not concentrating on our work. What that means, I don't know. What I do know is that as writers, we need to be in a certain mood or environment to be able to write. And, admittedly, not everyone has the same taste in music, which I feel for me is quite obvious. Now we're all pissed. Not only are we not allowed to listen to music we like, but we are also forced to listen to music we don't like. Here is when the malicious compliance begins. During our team's turn, we decided to choose a genre of music that is what is known here as Gigi. Do we like it? Yes. Do some people in the office hate it? Also, yes. But not enough people hated it to the point of raising a complaint, so we left it at that. However, in the afternoon, I decided that it was time for my weekly crash out and decided to blast some Taylor Swift songs. A majority of my team loves her, but do you know who doesn't? Our very rock music loving, patient, and understanding team lead. She later told us the reason: she had a niece or nephew that forced her to listen to a specific Taylor Swift song over and over again. It made her swear off Taylor Swift songs. After the second or third song, our team lead couldn't take it anymore, so she transferred to our meeting room, where she worked until the end of the day. The next day, the person who chose the song and playlist was also a Swiftie, so Taylor Swift music was blasting in our office again. This affected the team's productivity, the writers because we would just hold concerts singing along, and our team lead, who was somehow the victim of Operation Manager's cruel rule. But we followed the rule. No one was using their headphones, no music playing from the laptops. They checked this sometimes too. After only a week, the operations manager revoked the no headphones, only office-wide music policy. Apparently, we are now allowed to listen to anything we want as long as deadlines are met and quotas are exceeded. Honestly, it was fun for me because I listen to anything and everything. I can only imagine how this policy was a literal torture device to others. Shortly after, I resigned because of that operations manager for other reasons. But the fun we had with my office mates was absolutely memorable. Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called Major Zucchini 5315. It says, I like Taylor Swift just fine, but if I were really trying to get at someone, I'd play the Chipmunks Christmas album. I can still sing in every one of their voices and know all of the words. I'm Gen X, in case it wasn't obvious. This would be so funny if they brought in this rule in a place that I worked in because I really like thrash metal and just generally heavy music. And I can guarantee you that the majority of the people in the workplace really wouldn't like that music themselves. It might be a little difficult to put together a safe for work playlist, but I'm pretty sure I could do it and still have it be annoying enough to people who really don't like that genre. Sometimes a guy shows up to a friendly game with way too much attitude and gets exactly what he deserves. This story comes to us from MD Lapla, Basketball Malicious Compliance. So when I was around 20 years old, I started playing basketball in a gym with some friends. I wasn't very good at it, shot was extremely unreliable, and I've got absolutely no left-hand dribble, just like Jaylen Brown. But it was a nice way to do some cardio and have a laugh. Since I'm on the shorter side, I played point guard and tried to focus mostly on being a pest on defense and do the right pass. Don't picture YMCA extremely competitive games also. Most of the guys out there were about having fun, do some work, and improve a little bit. One day, new guy comes to the gym and asks to play. Short, stocky, bald, in his 30s, extremely serious, but with some aura of superiority to himself. Probably bank manager or something like that. He has a botched knee and wears a knee pad. Important detail for later. Let's call him Baldy. He also plays point guard, so we match up a lot. Baldy plays better than the rest of us because he's intense. He thinks that he must win each game. Shouts, complains, calls fouls that have nothing to do with the game, rarely passes the ball, and generally makes the game less fun for everyone else. One particular day, he's being extra annoying and, on a fast break, I try to swipe the ball out of his hands when he starts the layup movement, but end up fouling him pretty clearly. He calls foul, I acknowledge, 2 free throws, okay. 2 plays later, same thing. I try to swipe when he gathers, mostly ball, he calls foul. I argue, he gets angry, and starts to shout. I say, never mind, shoot your darn free throws, and we get on with the game. A couple plays later, again fast break, I try to swipe on gather, yeah, I never learn, clear foul. He gets up really angrily and walks to my face and says, if you're gonna foul me every single time, let me know, so next time you're standing below the basket, I'll jump knee first into your head and we'll settle this for sure. Okay, I'll be waiting. Baldy is fuming. He gets the ball on a fast break, lot of turnovers on my team, and starts running. I was a little behind on the play, so I have a solid 2 to 3 seconds on my painted area before he arrives. I know that he's not going to even try the layup, he's coming straight at me. So I get pretty much under my basket and I wait. And he delivers. He jumps knee with knee pad high into my face, ball in hand, not even trying to score. At the last moment, I slide to the side, so Baldy passes flying right by me and crashes into the basket support knee first. Baldy tries to get up, but he has hurt his knee and is limping badly. Out for the game for sure. So I walk to him and say, hey, you told me that we need to settle this for sure. I did just that. We're playing for fun here. Go take a shower. I guess that he took it better than expected. Everyone was ready for a brawl, but he just left. He never came back to play again. Nobody liked the guy anyway. Did anybody else picture this one kind of like the Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote? Wile E. Coyote chasing the Roadrunner. Roadrunner steps out of the way. Wile E. Coyote gets smacked into the support for the basketball hoop. That is a beautiful image. Some people think yelling demands instant results, but when you rush the process, you might not like the answer you get. This story comes to us from Brussels Stomp. I need an answer right now. This might not be the biggest story in the sub, but I still reminisce fondly of it. So a couple of years ago, I took over a restaurant in the center of the capital city of our country with a couple of friends. We are 3 associates and 1 chef cook. This restaurant was mainly a tourist trap and was also known to cater to big groups from either companies, business dinners, and tourist agencies, where they would just serve some decent slop in a historical setting for a fixed menu price. Our concept was to bring this establishment back to the locals, the neighborhood, and lovers of traditional food and drinks. So we tried a soft opening and limit ourselves to 30 customers per evening. But the previous owner hadn't even communicated towards his customers that the restaurant would be taken over, nor had he closed the online reservation system, to which we didn't have any access. So we got constantly flooded with requests for big groups, between 20 to even 50 people. And here our story begins. As we just started, we tried to please most people and cater to what was possible. One day, I got a phone call of some white collar, already quite condescending on the telephone, as I probably am just some lowly server on the phone, with a request to come with over 20 people in 2 days' time. I told him politely over the phone that I couldn't make the decision to take this reservation on my own, but that he could send us an email with the request and we'd talk it over with the chef cook and my associates to see if we could cater them. He didn't like this one bit and told me he couldn't wait that long for an answer. I immediately assumed he probably forgot to make a reservation for such a big group on time and that he failed his responsibility, but now tries to push it off on me. Like I always say, sounds like a you problem, not a me problem. But instead, I assured him he would get an answer on his email on the day itself. No, this is not acceptable. I need an answer right now. My patience was running out with this unrespectful fatneck, so I politely answered, "So to my understanding, you need an answer immediately?" "Yes," with a clear sound of superiority and thinking he had won. "Okay, sir, if you need an answer immediately, it will be very simple. That answer will be no." Sounds of crickets for a couple seconds. "So to what email address can I send that request?" We got his request by email, and he got an answer within 2 minutes. "We're sorry, but we can't accept your request to cater your group. Kind regards, name of the restaurant." Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called DeathBoyUK. It says, "Oh, I was so glad that played out how I hoped. Exactly the same here. I endeavor to be responsible and am moderately risk adverse. So if you hassle me for that answer, it will be a polite and immediate no then. Being browbeaten into permitting something has blown up in my face too many times for an angry person to get their way." OP responded and said, "Exactly. In my language we say, you offer them a hand and they will take your entire arm. Had it happened too many times, and it still happens on a smaller scale though. This is kinda like what happened when I was driving my tow truck many years ago now. I would have to call a customer and tell them how long it would take me to get there. I'd tell them, depending on traffic, it could be anywhere from 20 minutes to an hour. And they'd say, well, that doesn't work for me. I need to know the exact time you're gonna be here. And I'd just say, okay, an hour and a half then, because that's the worst case scenario. Thanks, bye." When leadership ignores expert advice to save a few bucks, it's only a matter of time before everything blows up, literally and figuratively. This story comes to us from Illuminatus Prime. "Lumi, we need more power." About 20 years ago, I was part of a team designing remote data collection sites on a government contract. The locations would be supplied with commercial utility power and have backup diesel generators as well. During one of the meetings, I pointed out that if utility power dropped, there could be at least a minute before the generators would have power restored, and another minute or two before the equipment was fully booted up and running again. Because I pointed out the situation, Bob, not his real name, a really charismatic go-getter from Manglement, voluntold me to look into the matter myself and make recommendations. So I did my research, determined that brand A uninterruptible power supplies would be best suited for the job, and then turned in my report. At the next meeting, Bob informed everyone they had decided to go with brand B power supplies instead, because they were about 10% cheaper per unit than brand A, and total cost would be almost 25% less per unit for buying in bulk. Now for a little tech talk. Brand A is what is called a double conversion unit, meaning that the internal batteries were in a constant charge-discharge state, much like the battery in your car, so that if utility power was interrupted, the output would never drop, and the equipment would not reboot itself. Brand B is what's called a standby unit, meaning that if utility power dropped, a relay would swing the UPS output to the inverter running off the batteries. There would be a momentary drop in power to the equipment, much like an emergency light in a restaurant. I tried to tell everyone through emails, CC'd to the entire team, plus BCC to myself and my lawyer, that brand B would cause problems for us further down the road. Bob's reply all overrode my concerns with, "It's only a few milliseconds, nothing to worry about. We're going with brand B, and that's final." Cue the malicious compliance. "Okay, Bob, we'll do it your way." For the first year or so, everything seemed fine. A few glitches here and there, but nothing drastic. Then, construction began on a nearby housing development. Suddenly, we started getting comms lost and system rebooted messages several times a day from each remote site further away. Power was being interrupted to the remote sites, and the brand B UPSs couldn't handle it. They were dropping their outputs for as long as 12 to 15 milliseconds, which shut off the equipment. When power came back on, the equipment would reboot. By this time, most of the others on this project had gone elsewhere. The customer complained to corporate, they stepped in, and of course, I was first in line to be thrown under the bus by Bob. They asked me why we were using brand B when brand A was the obvious choice. Ask Bob. Bob denied everything until I produced printouts of the original emailed recommendation and his responses to it. Cue the fallout. Bob was let go, and corporate had to shell out mucho dollars to retrofit the remote sites, with brand A, of course, and pay fines according to the government contract. I got to put in a lot of overtime to lead the retrofit effort. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, we have one from a user called MarquisDC. It says, I mean, from what OP is saying, he only suggested brand A. Bob found brand B on his own. Even if OP had suggested brand A plus and brand A, there's still a good chance Bob still goes with brand B because he wanted to be able to show the higher-ups he had found a better answer than what was recommended. OP responded to this one and said, it may even be safe to assume that Bob had a backroom deal going on with the brand B vendor. Pure speculation on my part, but not impossible either. So, are we saying that Bob in this story was on a power trip? I do get a charge out of stories like this though. What Bob did was kinda shocking, going against OP's recommendations. OP, I hope you don't have too much resistance going forward, and that the incompetence of the higher-ups doesn't get you too amped up. Sometimes the only way to get management's attention is to let their entire operation grind to a halt, and then show them exactly why it happened. This story comes to us from Jamal. I brought the company to a standstill to make a point. I worked in the engineering department of a smaller manufacturing company, around 70 to 80 employees. My responsibility, among other things, was to handle any design changes, edit parts and assembly drawings, bills of materials, etc. Previously, this was all handled by putting together a packet of actual paper documents that had to be shuffled from engineering to manufacturing, sometimes ping-ponging back and forth if we were doing something complicated that required input from various people within those departments. Eventually, the company started to implement a software-driven procedure that was supposed to eliminate the stacks of paper that would sometimes get lost on someone's desk. The problem was that our bare-bones staff didn't really have time to learn all of the ins and outs of the software and refine the process to be truly efficient. Basically, it was left so that if an item was entered into an engineering change order, it was locked down so that no one could build one, but also a customer couldn't even order one, or any machine that this item happened to be a component of, until the change process was completed. Sometimes this could take weeks. I tried explaining several times that if we ever had to work on some item that is used in several of our products, this would bring everything to a screeching halt. My manager at the time understood this, but could never get all of the people who needed to work on the software procedure to sit down and finalize everything. One day, I was tasked with changing the design of a hardware component that was used in every machine we built. I told my manager that as soon as I started the process, no one in sales would be able to enter an order for any customers until the process would be completed. He shrugged and said, "Do it," knowing that I was right. Within 30 minutes of getting started, a salesman came to my desk asking why he couldn't enter an order. I explained what was happening. He left, and soon after, the VP of the company was at my desk asking what needed to be done. So I told him he needed to corral everyone needed to hash out how the software was supposed to work properly instead of the half-but just lock everything down deal they left off with. He immediately called in whoever was on that list. It took a few days, as I recall, and the component in question was expedited to be approved within the week. To this day, I use this story in interviews whenever I'm asked one of those questions like, Give me an instance where you had to solve a major problem in the workplace. Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called Red Kathy. It says, "Nicely played there. Not your issue if they can't be bothered to set the system up properly." Another commenter down below called R Pain Piano said, "Manager was definitely on the malicious compliance train too. They'd clearly been getting stonewalled by Upper about the training on the software. Perfect opportunity." OP responded and said, "He was one of the few managers I really liked. He stuck up for his guys, but it was always like jousting windmills for him with upper management." The number of bosses we have in this subreddit that tell people to do something and just completely ignore the consequences is kind of unbelievable. Like, how are all these companies out there running efficiently when there are people so incompetent in the upper levels? Alright, let's do this. In the comments down below, let me know just how incompetent your boss is. I'd love to get a laugh from your stories. Just a quick follow-up here about my personal situation because I haven't been posting a lot recently. I am hoping to get back to it. Things are starting to look up a little bit here, but we're not completely cleared yet. I'm recording a couple of videos today to get out over the next couple of days, and I've started working on the story of Rick as well. For all of you Karma Crew members, there's now 72 of you. You guys are awesome, and I truly appreciate it. Our first story today comes to us from Great Palpatine. "I am the highest authority." One day, I'm working retail in my store. Now, what you need to know is that in my profession, there are three broad groups of products. One, the lowest tier, Tier A, is almost completely unregulated. These can be bought nearly everywhere. Second, the mid-tier, Tier B, can only be supplied by my boss. And third, the highest tier, Tier C, you need to get in writing before my boss can supply it to you. Now, a bit more about the Tier B products, which is important for this particular customer. Normally, when my boss is around, I can supply the Tier B products. Without my boss, we can still supply Tier B products, but we need to call someone from HQ to confirm this. Tier C products simply cannot be supplied without my boss being around, regardless of whether you have them in writing or not. But on this lovely day, my boss has to attend to something, and she's not around the whole day. I am holding the fort with the Tier A and B products, but as you can imagine, it's a lot more inconvenient now that I need to make multiple calls to HQ to be able to dispense the Tier B products. The queues are backing up, and it's just me and several other colleagues managing the store. My colleagues are focusing on selling the Tier A products. They can, in theory, handle the Tier B products, but they would really rather not to, and it's much better that I handle them. There's a whole story there about the Tier A and B products, but they don't belong in this story. So this customer comes waltzing in and wants to get a Tier C product. I tell her that I can't sell it to her, not today. "But I always get it here." "I'm sorry, I can't sell it to you, and my boss is not around today." "But I see that you can sell Tier B products." "Sorry, Tier B products are different. You want a Tier C product. To sell it to you, we need someone of a higher authority." "Okay, bring me to the highest authority in the store. They're always behind that counter." Points to boss's counter. Well, I guess this conversation isn't going anywhere, and seeing is believing. "Sure, madam. Okay, I will comply and bring you the highest authority in the store." Both of us head over to the counter, and I step behind it. Of course, I know him. He's me. "Hello, madam. I am the highest authority in the store right now, as my boss is away. I'm sorry, but I cannot supply you with what you want today. Could you try again tomorrow when my boss is back?" The lady looks confused, and then finally I see her connect the dots. Her expression changes to one of frustration as she walks away and doesn't come back. No, not even the next day. Boss is super amused when I tell her what happened the next day. There is a lot of speculation in the comments for this story about what these products are, and a lot of people seem to think they might be from a pharmacy. We have a comment from a user called NotMyUsername42 that says, "Sounds like a pharmacy maybe. There is a similar tier system in Australia. Tier C is not even supplied in my town as they don't have permissions or security to store it." Another commenter below that called FuyoBC said, That was my thinking. A, off the shelf over the counter. B, can be sold by the general staff if the pharmacist in charge gives the okay. C, you need a doctor's prescription. Another commenter down below called Musquerier said, "This sounds like a pharmacy to me. If I'm correct, why is your boss allowed to leave at all? In the Netherlands, you can't even open without the pharmacist being there." OP responded to this one and confirmed what everybody was thinking. It says, "Absolutely correct. The reason why we are allowed to open is that where I'm from, we operate as a normal retail outlet when the pharmacist is not in. The pharmacy is fundamentally separate, physically and operationally, from the rest of the store. It's confusing because the way that apothecaries operate around the world are fundamentally different. Where I'm from, it is allowed to even dispose Tier B products without a pharmacist physically present, thus the calls to HQ. Tier A products can be sold to everyone, there aren't any regulations on this." I've got to focus on the part of this one where they walked behind the counter and then told the lady that they were the highest authority in the store at that time. Oh, story time. When my wife and I used to run our convenience store, which we had for a few years, many years ago, I was quite young at the time. I was about 25 when we had that store and I owned it. But people didn't understand that when they came in. Because I was so young behind the counter, they thought that I was just somebody who worked there and not the owner of the store. So one day I had a really angry guy come in, and I can't remember what it was about at this point, but he was fuming, like flames coming out of his ears and his nose, and well, okay, that's pushing it a little bit, but you know what I mean. And he asked to speak to the owner. Well, he'd been a bit of a pain in the butt, so I took a step back from the counter, walked in a little bit of a circle right back to the counter and said, "Hi, I'm the owner. How can I help you today?" I do still remember the look on his face. He just turned around and walked out the door. It was one of my best moments of owning the convenience store. All it took was one stubborn manager, one annoyed customer, and one simple rule for everything to start unraveling at the drive-thru window. This story comes to us from Aurora Plays. I got my manager yelled at by a customer over his dumb rules. Obligatory first-time poster and all that. To understand what happened, you first need to understand two people, Susan and Jack. See, I used to work part-time at a burger joint that has a drive-thru, and I was often the one at the window. Susan was a regular customer, and everyone there had an opinion about her. She's very particular, has a tendency to snap at you if you don't do it just right the first time without being asked. I was her favorite employee though, because I would always take the time to chat with her if we weren't busy. She was actually quite pleasant once you got to know her, just a bit prickly. Now for Jack. He was the new GM, brought in to fix the restaurant. Now, I don't think there was anything that needed fixing, but the owner disagreed. He was originally meant to be the assistant GM, but then the owner fired our old GM and Jack was put in charge. He was a piece of work, the kind of manager you don't want to have. My favorite Jack moment was when he pulled all the staff on shift into the back while we were still open to lecture us on not smiling enough. You know the type of manager. On to the story. Now, one thing we had to do in the drive-thru is put a numbered sticker on the car's side mirror. This sticker was used by the runners who took food out to identify the car, so it's very important. Susan, however, didn't like having the sticker on her mirror. She was convinced she would get in an accident if the mirror was covered even a little, and always insisted on having it put on the car door instead. This wasn't out of the ordinary. We put stickers on doors all the time when we couldn't reach the mirror. However, Jack decided he wasn't having it and made a new rule that we could only put stickers on mirrors. I figured, okay, but if the customer asks for it, it should be fine, right? Wrong. I got chewed out for putting the sticker on Susan's car door. I tried to explain to Jack why I did it, but he wouldn't listen. Eventually, he just huffed at me and said, "Look, you need to put the stickers on the mirror, not on the door. No exceptions." Well, fine then. Cue Malicious Compliance. The next time Susan came in, I put the sticker on her mirror as ordered. She was confused, as I always put it on her door without being asked, and snapped, "What are you doing? Don't put it there, I'll get into an accident." I explained to her the new rule and that my hands were tied. I didn't want to get in trouble after all. Then I told her that it was Jack's rule. I didn't get to witness the next part directly, unfortunately. However, I heard about it secondhand from my coworkers. Apparently, when one of the runners brought her food out, she stopped them and asked them to grab Jack. She then proceeded to give Jack the butt chewing of a lifetime about his dumb rule. One particular quote that was relayed to me was, "What point is there to force them to put it there? They can see it just fine on the door." My thoughts exactly, Susan. Anyway, the rule was later amended that customers could request for the sticker to be placed on their door. Sorry, it wasn't as dramatic as most posts on here, but I wanted to share my bit of compliance. Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called Swampfish. It says, "I wouldn't go to a restaurant that puts stickers on my car. Why not use a paper flyer under the wiper or a hang tag or something?" Okay, first of all, I want to say that this malicious compliance is awesome because they pitted Karen against the incompetent boss, and it was so well planned out. Now, I can't say I've ever been somewhere that puts stickers on your car when they go through the drive-thru, but I think I can say that I love my car quite a bit, and I spend a lot of time keeping that car clean, and if somebody stuck something to my car when I went through a drive-thru, it'd probably be the last time I went through that drive-thru. I thought these days most of the fast food places had cameras outside that could log your license plate and whatnot. Wouldn't that be an easier way to do it? Log the license plate and just have it come up at the top of the receipt? Why put something on people's cars? So I know this one is going to be absolutely polarizing. If you're on YouTube, let me know in the comments down below whether you'd be okay with somebody sticking something to your car when you go through a drive-thru. When a restaurant manager issued a command during peak dinner rush, one overworked employee followed it to the letter, and the results were nothing short of a disaster. This story comes to us from DressMedium4644. You want bread? Okay, no one eats dinner then. I, 23 male, have worked for a certain colored crustacean for a year and a half now. I bounced around between positions until they stuck me as a backup, which for context means I finish the par list and make more of anything we run out of. It also makes you the baker. Now, this specific chain was well known for their biscuits. Like, I'd say most people just go there for them and not the actual food. So it's pretty common to hear a server yell, "down bread," on a half-hour schedule. Usually, I can keep up with the demand and my par list. But one day, our morning prep person dipped and I couldn't come in early due to something personal. So when I got there, it was a mess. No bread, no prep food, just chaos. I get things under control until the rush comes in. By that point, I'm swamped and I can't keep up with bread because the line needs food constantly made. I was in fact asking for assistance and wasn't given any. I got so behind on bread that our manager on duty comes to the back and tells me, "Whatever you're doing for the line, stop, make the biscuits and nothing else for the rest of the night." Cue malicious compliance. I tell our line that I can't help them anymore and that they're on their own. I begin cranking out biscuits like a machine while the line struggles to keep up with the orders. It gets so bad that the same manager comes back and asks why we have 40+ minute tickets and no food has gone out. They calmly tell him it's because they have me making bread and not getting them the materials they need. The manager asks me why I'm not doing my job, and I explain that I'm only following his orders and only focusing on the bread. I think we had like 6 tables leave because their food was taking over an hour to get to them. Food went out cold, made incorrectly, missing components, the works. All because they made me focus on making the biscuits. I got called into our GM's office the next day to explain what happened and why our sales were so bad. I happily explained what the manager told me and walked out scot-free. About a month later, all backups have a baker, and if a morning prep person cannot come in, the managers are responsible until the backup can arrive. Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called "Comments Are Nice Too." It says, "As they should be. Any manager worth their salt is going to pitch in whenever they're needed." Another commenter down below called an old IT guy said, "Nothing bothers me more than a manager who is unwilling to step up and help out when circumstances warrant. Your manager is not very good at his job, and then tried to throw you under the bus for not doing the impossible." I've had a few jobs just like this where the manager just wants to sit in their office all day, and they don't take any responsibility when things just go to crap. It's all the worker's problem, it's not the manager's problem at all, when they really should have been getting off their butt, getting out there, and helping out themselves. It is very true. A good manager is somebody who will step up and help out and get the job done. They lead by example, not sitting in an office. One manager thought demanding written approval for everything would get them more control, but it ended up bringing the entire office to a standstill. This story comes to us from Lewis Allen. You want it in writing? You got it. A few years back, I was working in a small office where I basically did a bit of admin work, customer service, scheduling, you name it. I was kind of the unofficial catch-all employee. My manager loved being in control, but would never actually take responsibility when things went sideways. One day, one of our longtime clients called in and asked to reschedule a major service appointment. They were super reliable, always paid on time, and honestly, just easy to work with. I looked at the schedule and saw that with a bit of rearranging, we could make their new time work just fine. So I went ahead and made the change. Done and dusted. Later that day, the manager stormed into my office like she had just caught me stealing company secrets. She asked if I rescheduled the said client without her approval. I affirmed and told her I've done that in the past. She then said from then on, I was not to make any schedule change without written approval from her. Email me every time. I want it in writing. Those were her words. Okay then, if that's what she wanted, I could play that game. From that moment on, I emailed her for every single change, even the smallest, most routine stuff. Appointment time shifts, when someone came back from lunch late, if a client called in to confirm something, if a tech was running 10 minutes behind, it didn't matter. I sent it all. And I waited for her written approval every time. It didn't take long before things started to pile up. Clients were calling back wondering why their appointments hadn't been confirmed. Techs were waiting in the parking lot because I couldn't officially send them to the next job without her go-ahead. One poor guy waited 45 minutes because she didn't check her email all morning. After about 2 weeks of this nonsense, she came charging into my office, completely exasperated. She asked why I was blowing up her inbox with all of that. I simply told her I was just doing exactly what she asked. You said everything had to be in writing. So I'm making sure I have your approval before touching anything. She just stood there blinking, realizing she had created her own nightmare. Let's just say that little policy didn't last much longer. Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called Sigwin. It says, "I'm glad you no longer have to deal with that, but you should have asked her to send you an email so you could have her instructions in writing." Opie responded and said, "This happened years ago. I didn't have the knowledge I have now." Another commenter down below called NeverDropsIn57 said, "I imagine it lasted about long enough to soothe her ego about not folding too soon. If she had the potential to grow into a good manager, she'd have admitted she was mistaken and fixed it on the spot." Opie responded and said, "Trust me, she didn't apologize, not even once." Sometimes you just want to look that manager in the eye and say, hey, this is the problem you caused because of what you told me to do, so now you need to fix it. And yes, I will take that in writing, because documentation is something we drive home here all the time. You need everything written down so that you can use it later when they try to screw you. A frustrated developer pushed back on a QA analyst's detailed bug reports, and management backed him up. But cutting corners has a way of catching up with you. This story comes to us from Harry Mason 02. "You want me to stop logging bugs? Okay, but don't say I didn't warn you." Hi, longtime lurker, first time poster. This happened a couple years ago when I was working as a QA analyst for a mid-sized software development company. Thought some of you might enjoy it. I was part of a Scrum team working on a new feature for a large enterprise client. Our team was made up of the usual suspects: devs, a Scrum master, a product owner, and myself as the sole QA. Now, I'm a pretty thorough tester. I take pride in not just finding bugs, but documenting them clearly with steps to reproduce, screenshots, logs, you name it. Some devs loved me for it, others not so much. One dev in particular, we'll call him Mike, really hated having bugs logged against his code. He had this passive-aggressive attitude, where any issue I found was user error or not a bug. The guy had a serious ego problem, and believed his code was flawless. We were getting close to deadline, and I was logging a lot of issues. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to warrant attention. Some were cosmetic, others were functional, but all were valid. Mike didn't like that I was slowing things down. During a sprint planning meeting, Mike went on a mini rant about how QA was bogging the team down with unnecessary bugs, and how we shouldn't waste time logging minor issues that don't block functionality. Surprisingly, the PO, who was also feeling the deadline pressure, sided with him. The decision was made. From now on, only log critical blocker issues. Everything else can be reported informally or ignored. I clarified. So, you want me to stop logging non-blocking bugs, even if they're reproducible? Exactly. Let's focus on shipping. You got it, boss. For the next 2 sprints, I only logged blockers, like the app crashes or data corruption level stuff. Everything else, I kept to myself. No documentation, no tickets, nada. The release went live, and all heck broke loose. Users were finding buttons overlapping on mobile, broken tooltips, form validation failures, inconsistent date formats, slow load times on certain views. None of it was technically blocking, but it made the experience feel amateurish. Cue a very uncomfortable post-mortem with the client. The PO asked why none of these issues were found during QA. I just smiled and said, they were found, but per your instruction, I didn't log them. Silence. Mike tried to chime in, but the damage was done. Upper management got wind of the fiasco and mandated that all issues, regardless of severity, must be logged going forward. Mike was moved to a different team shortly after. Not just because of this, but it didn't help. And I got an apology and a thank you from the PO. Just like the last story, this one is the one that drives home you need documentation on everything. Boss tells you not to do something that is kind of a critical part of your job, get it in writing. So that when they come down on you later and say, why weren't you doing this? You're supposed to do this. You can actually show them, oh no, I was told not to. And it's not just your word against them. If you're able to produce an email from the boss saying that you were supposed to ignore that. You know, I honestly have no idea how some workplaces actually function. After reading all these stories on malicious compliance over the years, there are way too many incompetent people out there. This story comes to us from Select Sample 9944. Doesn't add up? Make it add up? Well, okay then. This happened many years ago when I was a systems administrator for a now defunct company. I was to go to training, and I ended up going to Canada to train on some then new systems. No biggie, I kept my receipts and ended up overspending a bit because, well, I got to see the sights and got to have some tasty food. When I got back, I submitted my expense report. I wrote down the numbers and factored in the current exchange rate, Canadian dollars to US dollars, and figured that was that. I mean, being honest, right? Well, oh my gosh, my boss's boss went to my boss and complained that I couldn't even add anything up. You see, the amount I was showing they owed me was less than what the receipt showed. Canadian dollars were worth maybe 65 cents of American dollars. So it got rejected, and my boss's boss said, make them match. I looked at my boss and said, you know that's Canadian, right? My boss just shrugged and said, make him happy and make the numbers add up. Well, okay then. I added the Canadian dollars up and didn't factor in the exchange rate. So instead of requesting a reimbursement of, for example, not the actual numbers, $650 US, I put down $1,000 Canadian. They cheerily paid it. Only me and my boss knew, but it was so much more trouble trying to do the right thing. No one ever tried to correct it. On the plus side, it pretty much paid for the extras on the trip. Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called Illuminatus Prime. It says, did the boss's boss have little targets painted on his shoes? It makes shooting themselves in the foot that much easier, I'm told. If this boss couldn't figure out the difference between Canadian dollars and US dollars, I'm not sure it was a target painted on his shoes, but it might have said TGIF on the top. You know, toes go in first. It really does amaze me how many incompetent bosses there are out there. Oy. Ever been told to stay in your lane by someone new to the job, only to watch everything fall apart the moment you do? Let's just say, this manager learned real quick how much the extra actually mattered. This story comes to us from Alice Wilson. Stick to your job description. Alright, enjoy the chaos. I, 18 female, work as a receptionist at a small office. We're a tight team, so I usually help with little things outside my role. Stocking coffee, prepping meeting rooms, answering overflow calls from the back office. Last week, we got a new office manager. First day, she told me, from now on, stick strictly to your job description, no more doing other people's work. She said it in that passive-aggressive way that basically meant, stay in your lane. I said, okay, got it. So I stopped doing everything outside my job description. Didn't refill the coffee when it ran out, didn't set up the boardroom for the big client meeting, didn't transfer calls that came in after hours, didn't remind the guy in accounting about his 2 p.m. Zoom, which I always used to. It was absolute chaos by the end of the day. The manager pulled me aside and asked why I let everything fall apart. I smiled and said, I'm just sticking to my job description, like you said. She's been a lot quieter since, and I'm still just doing my job. Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called Other Alan. It says, I never will understand the mentality that when some new manager comes in, they gotta change up everything. I've never been a manager, but when or if I ever become one, I would be like a ghost, just watching and seeing how things work, what might help. Then you introduce changes slowly over time. Oh, come on, that's not how it works. You get into that manager position and all of a sudden, all of that power goes to your head, and everybody needs to listen to you, and you know better, and everything you say is gospel, and everybody must listen to you, or they must get in trouble or even be fired. Isn't that how management works? Because that's how it is in a lot of these stories. When a company rewrote the rules to avoid paying overtime, they forgot one tiny detail, and it ended up costing them thousands. This story comes to us from Doulaman96. Changing the definition of overtime? Great! The company I used to work for changed their definition of overtime to be any hours worked over 40 per week, to avoid paying overtime to people who stayed later on any given day, and tried to encourage them to take that time in lieu. If you work 10 hours on Monday, you are encouraged to work 6 hours on Tuesday instead of claiming 2 hours of overtime pay. Here, overtime pays at 1.5 times your normal hourly rate, even if you're salaried. When they changed these rules, they forgot about my team. 99% of the company worked regular 9 to 5, Monday to Friday shifts, but my team worked a 24/7 rotating shift. Just by the nature of working shifts like that, sometimes you end up working up to 55 hours in a single calendar week by doing normal 8-hour shifts with no overtime. This was fine because it meant the next week you worked 25 hours or so. It always averaged out to be 80 hours a fortnight. But by the wording of this new rule, which was written into our contracts by the union so they couldn't go back on it, we were suddenly entitled to loads of overtime. It added up to about $6,000 per year in extra pay from doing the exact same hours as before. Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called Haddix. It says, there's a little note for management in here. If what you're doing is meant to save money by paying your people less, and their union agrees to it, it probably will not save anyone anything. You know, back when I was working for Rick, he used to doctor the schedule all the time. So if we were out on some kind of delivery and we were an hour past our finish time, he would actually change it to say we got off at the time we were supposed to get off, and we wouldn't get anything out of it. He'd say you could leave early another day that week, but then that would never happen because we'd be out on deliveries that would take us past the finish time again. So yeah, I've definitely learned my lesson since then, and I think we should add in here, screw you, Rick, screw you very much. Some customers walk in convinced the price is the only thing that matters, until they see the actual price tag. This one flipped fast. This story comes to us from Great Palpatine. Show me your best, most expensive product. When I was working in retail, the stuff we stocked were generally meant for everyman use. That means that they are not very highly priced, and the quality is also average. Not poor, mind you, but definitely not Fortnum and Mason kind of quality. Product for the masses, affordability is key. In comes this lady who tells me about a problem she has. I recommend several solutions, which, like I said, are everyday brands which are affordable. This lady wrinkles her nose. Why are you showing me all this cheap stuff? Show me the most expensive stuff you have. I only want the best stuff. Price really is no object. Sure, I grin, knowing this is the time I put all my store knowledge to good use. I lead her behind the store. Here, madam, are all our premium products. We have this premium product, which works amazing and has plenty of good reviews. And it is simple and easy to use, too. Unlike the cheap product and mid product that I showed you earlier, this one just needs to be used once or twice, and your problem will all clear up. Note, premium product is 5 times the price of the mid product. And over here we have deluxe product, which you'll just need to use once. And look how easy to use it is. Deluxe product is even more expensive than premium product. Now our dear customer has gone very, very quiet and is starting to look a little uncomfortable. Wow, she mutters under her breath, but also in a voice loud enough for me to hear, that's expensive. Shall we return to looking at the cheap and mid products? I ask with a smile. Yes, please, she says, looking relieved. She becomes much more receptive after that to my suggestions. Well, I guess price was an object after all. Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called Vendedirt. It says, she wanted to feel rich for a few seconds and impress a stranger with her wealth. OP responded and said, flexing to people working in retail is wild. We really don't care whether you're rich. We also know that if you were truly rich and willing to spend, you wouldn't have been shopping at what is effectively the Asda of my industry. I love people like this. They're the ones that are confusing cost and quality, because a lot of times cost, you're just paying for the name on the product, but they're sometimes even made in the same factories as the cheaper product. They just have a different case and a different name on them, and you pay for that exclusivity of that shiny name. Ugh, what BS. Sometimes the best way to prove a point is to follow instructions exactly, even when they don't make sense. Let's see how that played out in one high school science class. This story comes to us from SmellyCat0007. Teacher told me to only use textbook definitions, so I did, and suddenly that wasn't enough. Back in high school, I had a science teacher who hated when students explained things in their own words. I loved writing creative, real-world examples in my answers, made things easier to remember, and showed I understood the concept. But after a test where I got marked down for not quoting the textbook exactly, she said, from now on, stick to the definitions from the book, word for word, no paraphrasing. Okay, fair enough. So for the next test, I followed her instructions to the letter. Every answer was verbatim from the textbook. Even the questions that clearly needed some explanation or thought, I just dropped in the definition and moved on. I ended up getting a lower grade than usual. she marked a few answers incomplete or not fully explained. I politely reminded her that she told us to only use textbook definitions, nothing extra. Showed her the note I wrote down from class. Her response? Well, I meant stick to the definition, but also explain your understanding. Oh, so now it's both? After that, the rule quietly disappeared, and we were encouraged to use both the textbook and our own understanding. Sometimes doing exactly what you're told is the best way to prove a point. Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called Witasus. It says, "You didn't get it in writing though. Fatal mistake that could, if avoided, lead you to getting a better grade after reevaluation." OP responded and said, "True, lesson learned. Next time, I'm getting every instruction in writing. Verbal rules don't stand a chance during reevaluation." As we keep on driving home here, document, document, document. Because if you don't document, you don't have anything to back yourself up when you say, "But you told me to do this." They could just go, no I didn't. Where's your proof? A simple request turns into a surprisingly satisfying moment of karma, all because someone didn't want to listen. This story comes to us from Missy Mocha. Put them back where you found them? Okay. So my aunt is super into these ceramic plates, like she has a few sets and treats them like they're super fragile. She calls them her babies. She's always warning everyone to stay away from them. So here's the thing. She has these cabinets that are all not exactly strong anymore, and in it are her precious plates. They literally look like they're about to fall. I noticed it and thought I was helping her when I shifted the plates and put them in the other cabinets that look stronger. But when she found out, she got really upset and she said, "I warned you to stop messing with my plates. I like them where they are." And I pointed out why I transferred the plates. She said she didn't care. I should take them back. So I put them right back where I found them, and then days later, the cabinet fell, and so did all her precious babies. Well, guess who was not wrong? Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called Haunting Prior Nan. It says, "And if you choose to talk to her, you'll find that she believes they are worth thousands. As a matter of fact, your nephew should be prepared when she passes away. They will be mentioned in the will and be treated like half of her estate's worth." You know, I'm surprised there wasn't more to this one, like OP getting blamed for it because the cabinet failed after they moved them back. I feel like this aunt would be the kind of person who wouldn't take any responsibility for this and would completely put it on OP. Some people care more about rules than common sense, especially when it's 110 degrees and you're just trying to do your job. This story comes to us from America for Life. "You can't park here." Okay, so some background. I am a delivery driver working for one of the big delivery companies in the US. Today's delivery route includes a very high-end neighborhood with very narrow streets that have cars parked on both sides. So even more narrow for my big delivery truck. My next package is a big one, definitely a desk or flat pack furniture weighing at least 80 pounds. I stop at the address and park my vehicle basically in the middle of the street. But I will be quick, and I have my flashers on, so no problem. From the delivery address, a little old lady with the anger of Satan comes flying out yelling, "You can't park here." I say back, "Oh, well, where can I park to deliver this?" She says, "The nearest parking for non-residents is at the tennis court a half-mile away." Lugging an 80-pound desk a half-mile when I'm already stupid far behind and it's 110 Fahrenheit outside, no thanks. Wait a minute, I read the label on the package. "Are you Karen?" She responds, "Well, yeah, but what does that have to do with you parking here?" Malicious Compliance. Pulls emergency brake, slams vehicle in drive, seatbelt still on. I am not in park, so not parked. Wiggles heavy big package out of the window while holding down the brake, placing it standing up at her feet, scanned as left with resident. I yell as I drive off, "Package delivered safely, have a nice day." I think I hear her say, "Wait, you can't just..." As I drive off, I look into my side view to see a very confused old lady looking at her desk than looking at my delivery truck barely fitting down her street. Yes, there were better ways of handling this, but all would require me to walk a half mile in the heat, either to leave a notice or carry a desk. Either way, I simply didn't have time for that. Not the best story on here, but it made me feel good in the moment, and I felt like I had to tell someone. Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called Glenn Marshall. It says, "You did what needed to be done to someone who needed it." Was this Karen giving off HOA president vibes to anybody else who just listened to that story? Oy, the kind of Karen that goes around just making sure everything in the neighborhood is just the way she wants it, because she's super important. Bitch, go home. What starts as a simple argument over coffee takes a sharp turn, and ends with a moment no one in the break room will ever forget. This story comes to us from Furtive Fox 88. Don't use the good water for coffee? Okay. I've read some malicious compliance stories pertaining to coffee, and decided to share my own. My family owns a funeral home, and I would work there for a summer job when I was in high school. While working there, I would show up before everyone and make the coffee for the day, and do some light cleaning. The break room where the coffee machine was also had your standard office water cooler, so I would make the coffee with the good water. One day, I was making the coffee and my grandfather, the boss, showed up and asked why I was using the expensive water instead of the tap. I told him the tap water makes the coffee taste like crap. I know because I made it with tap water once, took a sip, and then poured it right down the drain. He didn't believe it was that bad. He made his coffee from tap at home, and it's fine. Note, he never drank the office coffee. He drank his at home with breakfast. What he didn't take into account was that while the funeral home was nice and remodeled, a very old building, the pipes were not, because the water was used to flush toilets and wash hands, not for drinking. He insisted that tomorrow I use tap. The coffee would mask the taste, and no one would tell the difference. Okay, you're the boss. The next day, I make the coffee with the tap. Now, on this day, we had a funeral that morning. 2 funeral directors, some members of the family of the deceased, the preacher, and I were in the back room trading small town gossip when one of the directors took a big chug of the coffee. The machine was old, the coffee came out hot, but the hot plate would only keep it lukewarm, and immediately spewed it all over the preacher, ruining his white dress shirt. This was also the first time I ever heard a preacher curse. The funeral was delayed 30 minutes while the preacher ran home to change. Needless to say, I was allowed to make the coffee with the expensive water from then on. It's still something we all laugh about to this day, even the preacher. Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called JellyfishFit3871. It says, "Man, my family, small town, uses one funeral home. I'm convinced that it's the choice because the coffee is pretty decent for funeral home coffee. But I'm also convinced we just hire random preachers because those guys are forever describing my late relatives as really wonderful people. And I know better. It's a strange business model." Does anybody else here really want to know what the curse the preacher said? Like, was it holy shit by chance? The only thing that could have made this story better was if Grandpa drank some of that coffee from the funeral home themselves and realized just how bad it was. When a toxic boss decides to lay down the law, one employee takes that rule and runs with it, right into some very expensive consequences. This story comes to us from Picture Glittering 202. I need to work regular office hours? Sure thing. I used to work for a nonprofit that has very important government contracts. My role expanded quite a bit over the years, and they weren't sure who I should report to. Now, the executive director of my state didn't like me. I think it's because I take up a lot of space when I know what I'm talking about. I was not thrilled when I became her direct report. She has her own drinking problems, and I don't suffer fools when it comes to my money. Before I reported to her, my boss didn't care what hours I worked or where I worked from, which was perfect for me as a single mom of 2 who got her bachelor's and master's while working there full-time. I had weekly one-on-one meetings with my new boss on the days she worked from home, drinking. As a child of an addict and alcoholic, she could really tear me down sometimes, but I put up with her drunken tirades. But here's the kicker. My cousin got diagnosed with breast cancer about 4 months after her husband left her. I was her only family in the area. So I told the boss that I would need to take her to chemo, etc. She told me that I had to take PTO for those times I was going to be with my cousin. I was a salaried employee, so I didn't understand, but whatever. And she added that I needed to be in the office from 8:30 to 5:30 every day per my contract. Great! So I started working those hours. A couple of weeks in, she asked me why I was telling my internal customers that I didn't have time to do their marketing. I told her that I was working my contract hours and was no longer logging on at home from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. to make sure everything was done. The look on her face was priceless. She didn't change her mind though. She had to hire another marketer. Not great for her non-profit budget. Wait, OP, were you working extra hours from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. and not getting paid for it? That's kinda dumb. Especially when you're working regular hours during the day as well. Oy, some people really let themselves get taken advantage of at work. OP, stick to what you're doing now and just work the hours they want you to because they don't pay you enough to stay up at night. This story comes to us from Week Story 6835. The water park is off limits? Okay. This story wasn't an intentional malicious compliance response. It just sort of happened that way. This happened about 25 years ago. Every year, my high school would organize a school trip to an amusement park just outside of town. In order to go on the trip, you had to fork over $10 and fill out a form. If you were under 16, your parent had to sign the form. Standard crap. But there was one teacher in charge who made it a point to remind us constantly that we weren't allowed to enter the water park. Otherwise, we were allowed to do what we wanted so long as we didn't get in trouble or do anything that reflected poorly on the school. Fair enough. Like I said at the start of the story, this malicious compliance wasn't intentional, but suffice it to say, we arrived at the bus about 15 minutes before it was scheduled to return to town, soaked to the bone. If looks could kill, we would have been dusted right then and there. So he demands to know what happened, and we told him. You see, there's a ride at this park that is kind of a simple looking roller coaster. It's not very high and only has one drop, but the caveat is the track is actually a slide with water, and the drop is over a body of water that causes a kind of wave that splashes both the rider and whoever is standing on the bridge across from the drop. We all stumbled across this ride while we were wandering the park and debated whether or not we should go on it. We decided, unanimously even, that technically this ride wasn't in the water park, so riding it wasn't actually against the rules. We rode it twice. By the time we finished explaining, he was glaring daggers at each one of us, and after a pause, he just pointed behind him and said, "Get on the effing bus." Everyone on the bus stared at us while we boarded, either thinking we were heroes or rebels. Whatever the case, I still laugh about this story whenever I tell it, and one of my friends suggested I should post this on Reddit under Malicious Compliance. So, here we are. Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called Many Stripes. It says, "Perfectly reasonable interpretation of the rules, and I would have done the same. There could have been all kinds of reasons they didn't want people in the water park unrelated to water. If they didn't want you to get wet, the rule should have been about that, not about a specific physical part of the park." Another user called I'm a Mage Fight Me said, "Don't most amusement parks have at least one water ride? Wild that the teachers didn't realize that and make sure to say not to go on any water rides if they didn't want you guys getting wet at all." OP responded and said, "Yeah, the next time we went to the same park, the rule was changed to no water rides, period. They learned after what we did." OP, you realize there's still a loophole here, right? Because they said you couldn't go in the water park and you couldn't do any water rides. but they didn't say anything about standing on that bridge and getting soaked when that ride went by. Too bad it was 25 years ago because I would have played that one out and stood right on that bridge waiting to get soaked just to see what the teacher would say. When your boss demands more energy on the phones, you give them exactly what they asked for, even if it turns your whole office into a live radio broadcast. This story comes to us from Swishbone. You need to be more energetic on calls. 10-4. This incident is from around 8 years ago, though some important context is that 20 years ago, at university, I was a DJ for a show on my student radio station. Here, I learned the radio host voice for between songs. Extremely positive, short burst. So onwards, I was a claims adjuster for an auto insurer. My role served as first notification of loss, confirming what level of cover was held, if a vehicle was likely to be repaired or salvaged, potential liability outcome, and any underwriting concerns. My natural tone of voice is quite flat and professional, so while a customer may have disliked certain outcomes, it was never hostile or complaint-worthy. However, one team leader audited a telephone call I handled. Correct liability, correct offering of a repairer, correct attempt to capture third-party claimant, correct timescales, incorrect customer mirroring, and service. You have to set the correct expectations, they said, but you're far too flat and come across disinterested. That's not how we handle claims. The customer didn't complain, I said. They even thanked me on the call. Our call standards are high service and care. You must be more energetic. I need to feel you on the call. 10-4, I said. You'll get more energy, I thought. So from that moment on, full deployment of my radio announcer voice. Customer can't have repairs due to damage. Your vehicle has rolled over. The repair will be more than the vehicle value. It's a total loss. You get no courtesy vehicle. Thank you for calling. Good afternoon. Another insurer disputes liability. I understand you support your client, but the facts of the case have my insured established and correctly proceeding. No, I'm not willing to concede this matter. Yes, I'm aware you are litigating. You must serve papers at Gibbs address. Thank you for calling and have an awesome day. To make matters even more ridiculous, my office had desks that rise and fall at a button press. So I would be stood up, voice projecting over the entire team, straight to the team leader. Other adjusters would be muting calls while laughing, others taking bets on what threats the other caller was saying, while my leader stewed in their seat, nailed in place by the call energy they felt. The cherry on the cake being the external auditors marking said calls as top marks all across the board. Exemplary service and understanding attitude. My leader was not impressed and could do nothing. Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called Aquamarine Jello. It says, I'm a school secretary, so my phone voice is super sweet and honestly nauseating. Laugh out loud. I use it on my husband when he's pissing me off. Well done. I've got to go right back to my experience in call centers, and specifically the one where I met my wife. My wife was the quiet quality girl, and she would sit with me and monitor my calls because I didn't like pushing sales on customers. So when she sat with me, I would very sarcastically offer the sales to the customers. And unfortunately for me, more often than not, when I was doing that, the customers would actually take them. But I guess it did all work out in my favor in the end, as that quiet quality girl and I have almost been married for 14 years now. What happens when a restaurant tries to cut corners by starving its own staff? One cook decides he's had enough and serves up some piping hot compliance instead. This story comes to us from Gannon's Foot, restaurant that didn't want to feed its employees. So I was a cook for a good long portion of my life. The last restaurant I worked at was a pretty nice farm-to-table Italian place. I really liked the owners and had worked for them at a previous restaurant. And I also liked having 2 vacation weeks and insurance, so I followed them to this new place. Now, the owners were great. The GM, however, was a stubborn and stingy person. We opened the place up with the idea that there would be a family meal every day before the dinner shift started. Nothing crazy expensive, just a salad and pasta for everyone. Pretty quickly though, it just turned into pasta. Then eventually into nothing at all, with no replacement meal plan for the employees at all. I understand the need to keep costs down, especially at a new restaurant, but this was getting ridiculous. There were days I'd end up working a double and very angrily eating just a Cliff Bar during the whole work day. I'm serious about the GM being a penny pinching bee though. The most egregious example I have is if any servers or cooks made a mistake, they were expected to purchase their mistake. There was one time I made a pasta dish by mistake and refused to buy it. Mistakes happen, darn it. My assistant GM knew it was gonna be a big deal, so he ended up purchasing it. Eventually, hours started getting cut, and people were being let go. I had been given a couple of split shifts a week. I hated them so much, but needed the money. I was expected to come in and open, work until lunch, leave for a couple hours, and come back for the dinner shift. So after a few weeks of these shifts, it became pretty routine. It allowed me to get lunch either nearby or at home. Except one day, it was unexpectedly busy for lunch. We got really slammed and couldn't really catch up, so they asked me if I could stay and help prep for dinner. Now, me being maliciously compliant said that I planned on having lunch during that time, but I'll stay if they let me have something good. I'm just thinking pasta with meat on it. They said, we can't do that. So I said, I can't stay then. The look on both my bosses' faces said it all. They of course couldn't back down, but I wasn't going to let them walk all over me, especially when I'm just following and expecting to work my scheduled hours. I came back a couple hours later with a full belly and worked a pretty busy dinner shift. My split shifts didn't last too much longer after that. There was one more time when I had an unexpected Thursday night off, but I was asked to come in and wash dishes. Once again, I needed the money, and I'm not above washing dishes, so I said yes. Now, I've done dishes before for my normal pay, and it wasn't a problem. That's what I was expecting, my normal pay. I come back and they ask me to please clock in under the dish button they had just created for me. I asked if the pay was different, and I was told yes, it's a couple dollars less. I nearly walked out. I only stayed because my coworkers would have a much worse day without me there. But I was livid. My assistant GM tried to offer me some food scraps, but I looked at him and refused. Then I remembered that dish employees get a free meal that nobody took advantage of because of the cheap GM. I told my assistant GM I wanted a pork rigatoni pasta dish with peppers in it, and he was completely caught off guard. What? Who's paying for that? He says to me. I merely reply with, dish gets a free meal, and walk away. A few minutes later, I get my lovely pasta dish. I go sit down for a few minutes, savor every bite, and come back to my smiles from my coworkers and my GM not looking at me. The dish button was removed from my clock-in screen after that. Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called Dizzy Tangerine 9391. It says, hospitality is hard enough to work in without adding crappy managers on top of that. Well played. OP responded and said, exactly. Things eventually did get better at that restaurant when the GM left. Another commenter down below called Type A with ADHD said, good story. My question is, how can the owners be great when they're willing to allow such a tightwad of a manager who is willing to starve their employees at a restaurant? The owners are not great. They should have ripped the GM a new one about not feeding employees. Oh well. OP responded and said they spent all their time at their other restaurant and left the not so great GM to run this one. They didn't renew her contract after the first year because they saw how unhappy the staff was. Okay, let's make this perfectly clear to all of our viewers and listeners in the USA and in Canada. If you make a mistake at your job that wasn't malicious, you are not responsible for it, and they can't make you pay for it. So in the case of OP here, where they made something and they were forced to buy it because they made the wrong thing, yeah, that's illegal. Just like if you work at a gas station and the boss says you have to pay for any drive-offs, yep, that's illegal too. It cannot happen. I firmly believe that everybody should be taught labor laws when they're in high school, because if you don't know this stuff going into your jobs, you're just going to get screwed. A greedy landlord tries to flex his power after inheriting a long-term rental. But when a judge issues a very specific order, things start unraveling fast. This story comes to us from Maladjusted73. All modifications must be restored to the original. I told this story to a friend. She suggested I share it here. My family and I moved into a house in 2008. 5 bedrooms, 3,200 square feet, $1,600 a month. It was a decent price in 2008, and the rent stayed the same for many years. Since I'm reasonably handy, I would fix things myself rather than bother an old man. I'd lived there so long that I made quite a few upgrades. In 2024, the owner passed away and his son inherited the property. A week later, he gave notice of intent to inspect the property. During the inspection, he kept trying to open drawers and look through my belongings, which isn't legally allowed, and was rude when I stopped him. As he left, he handed me a notice that my rent was increasing to $4,000 monthly, about $1,000 over market value. I would have paid higher rent if it had been reasonable, but I wasn't paying that much. My month-to-month lease was worded to require 3 months' notice to raise the rent. I pointed out this fact, then gave him notice that I would be moving out at the end of that 3 months. A few days later, I was served with an eviction notice. The month-to-month lease also required 3 months' notice to evict me without cause. So, he tried evicting me with cause. He claimed I had made unauthorized modifications to the house, and cited the back door with a dog door installed. I still had the original door in the garage and the previous owner's permission, so it was neither unauthorized nor a modification. Regardless, the judge decided I needed to move out within 30 days, or he would grant the eviction. Additionally, he explicitly ordered that all modifications be restored to the original. This is where the malicious compliance comes in, and I'm sure you already see this coming. All the smart house additions I made were removed. The tool shed in the yard was removed. The pond was filled in. Closet organizers were torn out. Garage organizers were removed. The updated appliances were replaced with basic models. Every update I made was removed. And then I moved out. He sued me for removing everything. His lawyer cited a law that says any changes to the property become part of the property, and it's illegal to remove them when vacating the property. However, my lawyer pointed out the order from the previous judge, stating all modifications must be restored to the original. I provided receipts for all the things I had removed, proving I had added them and was required to remove them. I won the case, and he had to pay for my legal fees. A few months later, I got a call from his sister. Some of my mail had not been forwarded, and she wanted to ensure I got it. We had a short conversation about the entire ordeal. She told me the house was actually inherited by 4 siblings. Her brother had lied to everyone. First, he had raised the rent knowing I would move out. He already had a deal to sell the house to one of those big rental companies. He told his siblings the house had negative equity and nobody would get anything from the sale. In reality, the house was paid off and worth about $700,000. They had made an offer on the house which included all the stuff I later removed. He couldn't afford to replace everything, so they took him to court over the sale. Since all 4 siblings were listed as owners, all were named in the lawsuit, which is how they learned the truth. In the end, the house sold for $550,000. In exchange for not pressing fraud charges against him, his 3 siblings split the proceeds, and he got nothing. Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called Bed Without Sheets. It says, I'm glad he got what was coming to him in the end, although some jail time on top wouldn't have been unwelcome to the story. But I hope that 30-day eviction didn't seriously F you up, OP. I know how hard that can be. OP responded to this one and said, Jail time is still a possibility. They didn't press charges as part of their deal, but the state could still prosecute him if they wanted to. It's unlikely though. Moving was a pain, but I probably should have done it years ago. My kids were young when I moved in there. They're adults and on their own now. No reason to live alone in a 5-bedroom house. Another commenter down below called Zupernom said, Lease said 3 months for eviction, judge said 30 days, F that judge. OP responded and said, I don't think my state favors landlords, but my lawyer said some of the judges do. He told me one of the judges that deals with evictions owns multiple rental properties and almost always sides with landlords. Alright, if this story doesn't make you want to keep all your receipts for everything that you do to your rental property, then I don't know what will. It's very, very true that all it takes is one audit to make people hoard their receipts. When a nonprofit accuses a loyal worker of inflating his hours, they unlock a level of precision billing they never saw coming, and definitely couldn't afford. This story comes to us from Raj Already Taken. You think I'm fudging my hours? You're right. Here's my real hours. I started working for a nonprofit in 2019 after being a volunteer member since 2000. It was supposed to be temporary for 3 months or so, but the nonprofit dragged their feet hiring a permanent replacement. I'm fairly well off, not filthy rich, but debt-free and comfortable, and didn't need the money. So I never billed for my hours after working 15 months full-time. It was supposed to be $25 an hour, Canadian currency, but I was willing to work for free if they just found a replacement in a reasonable time. They were pressuring me for an invoice, so I finally invoiced them for 40 hours a week for 15 months, and it was about high $60,000. They were livid for a variety of reasons I didn't understand. They accused me of lying about my hours because I was a new father and my wife had gone back to work after maternity leave, and there's no way I could have worked that much. When I told them I had my son in daycare instead of staying at home with him, they sarcastically said, now you know what it's like to work an actual job like the rest of us. They were mad that I wasn't volunteering my time anymore like I used to, but I insisted I was, and that my build time was only for the TV bingo fundraiser and not for any other non-profit activities. They didn't believe me. I tried to tell them my hours were actually more than I billed for, and my hourly rate is greatly reduced compared to what I normally charge for all the work I was doing. IT, e-commerce, web design, marketing, HR, operations, bookkeeping, TV production, etc. But they said they didn't care about the rate reduction. They insisted that I charge my normal rates for my actual hours, and then deduct 10 hours a week for volunteering, which is about 10 times more hours than any of them volunteer for. Okay, bet. I started charging them $40 to $125 per hour depending on the task. I recorded all my tasks and hours in great detail. I charged for any time I spent doing what was normally volunteer work for the nonprofit. Then I finally deducted 10 hours a week. I was billing an average of 50 hours a week after the volunteer hours were deducted. I also took the opportunity to start hiring more people under me on their dime, so I could work way less than I did in the first 15 months, but still get paid the same, if not more. They couldn't say anything because it was exactly what they asked for. I was billing $1,000 a week before Malicious Compliance, and then about $3,000 a week after Malicious Compliance, which I started trimming back down closer to $1,000 a week after cutting my own hours. These guys kept doubling down and accusing me of incompetence and fraud over the next year and a half that I continued working, but I didn't care anymore. They turned my passion into a crappy job that I didn't need. So I stayed until all my amazing employees were hopefully set up for success and wrote that nonprofit out of my life for good. I didn't feel any guilt over being paid for my time with them because I had raised more money for them in 30 months, 30 million gross, about 20 million net, than they had raised in the 100 years before then. Jumping down to the comments on this one, there's one from a user called Tamale Impersonator. It says, hey OP, I run a nonprofit and would love tips on achieving even a tiny percentage of your fundraising. I'm sorry your old job sucked out your joy. I hope you find it again. I think I can answer this one for OP. Step 1, be rich. Step 2, don't be poor. Step 3, surround yourself with more rich people. That's how you get money into your nonprofit. This story comes to us from the Corvair. Unauthorized software? Happy to remove it. I work as a contractor for a department that aims high, flies, fights, and wins occasionally, I'm told. A security scan popped my work laptop for having Python installed, which I was told wasn't authorized for local use at my site. Edit, I had documentation showing it's approved for the enterprise network as a whole, and I knew 3 other sites using it. I was not notified it was not approved at our site until I was told to remove it, and our local software inventory, an old spreadsheet, was not provided until this event. This all happened within an official ticketing system, so I didn't even have to ask for it in writing or for it to be confirmed. I simply acknowledged and said I would immediately remove Python from any and all systems I operate per instructions. Edit, the instruction was from a person and was to remove it from all devices I used. I was provided no alternative actions as according to this individual, it was not allowed anywhere on our site. The site lost a lot of its fancier VoIP system capabilities such as call trees, teleconference numbers, emergency dial downs, operator functionality, recording capabilities, and announcements in the span of about 30 minutes as I removed Python from the servers I ran. The servers leveraged Python package against asterisk VoIP service used only for those unique cases to do fancy and cool things with call routing and telephony automation. And then, it didn't. I reported why the outage was occurring and was immediately told to reinstall Python everywhere and that they would make an exception. A short-lived outage, but still amusing. Moral of the story, don't tell a system admin to uninstall something without asking what it's used for first. Edit, yes, I should have tried to argue the matter, but the individual who sent the instruction has a very forceful personality, and it would have caused me just as much pain to try and do the right thing as it did to simply comply and have to fix it after. My chain was not upset with me when they saw the ticket. Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called PhoneGuy509. It says, as a VoIP guy myself, that would have been gut-wrenching to do, knowing often that the hooks don't always come back correctly. I think I would have snapshot and simply restored. Glad that worked out for you and hope they learned a valuable lesson. OP responded and said, it was surprisingly smooth to be fair, asterisk is fairly stable, and I just had to restart all the related services. I'm at the point where most things I've automated, however, so it gave me something to do. So you mean to tell me that your cybersecurity people didn't understand why Python needed to be there to help your VoIP system? Okay. I think all of those cybersecurity people need to go back and get some more training because that's just general knowledge. If they knew anything about how their systems worked that they're supposed to be securing, then they would have known that Python needed to be there. When your boss tells you not to speak up, sometimes the best revenge is just staying quiet and letting the fallout speak for itself. This story comes to us from Jarl Gunbjorn. Check down, not up. I was a cook in the army for a few years in the mid-aughts and had a surprisingly nice deployment to Bagram, Afghanistan. We would have a soul food night once a week stateside, but it was replaced by steak and lobster when we deployed. Since it had been a while since the last one, the dining facility manager decided it was time to bring back the soul food. He was off that night and a couple of our other higher leadership were in Qatar or on leave, so we had a newly promoted staff sergeant, E6, running the show. He was career Army, took forever to get this promotion, and excited about his progress. Meanwhile, I had just earned a demotion, E3 to E2, a couple months prior, and was persona non grata. So when I asked him where some of the items he took responsibility for were, as we approached open, he was furious. He gave me a hurried butt chewing that ended with, check down, not up. So 20 minutes later when he told me the line was set up and to get out there, I did not tell him he forgot one of his items. We opened to serve, and our Command Sergeant Major E9 and his newest guests were already lined up for soul food night. He requests a bit of this and that, and then stops in his tracks. Where's the corn? I'm sorry, Sergeant Major, I'm not sure. I swear I saw some getting made. You better have some darn corn, it's my favorite. Weird, but okay. I can get Sergeant Jerkface for you. Nope, I'll get him myself. He proceeded to enter the kitchen and began asking questions. The new staff sergeant comes hustling out, looks at the line, looks in a warmer, and pulls out a pan of corn on the cob. I pull one of the extra pans of another item we had out, and he slots the corn in. Then he tries throwing me under the bus with the Command Sergeant Major standing there. Why didn't you tell me the corn was not out? Sergeant, you just chewed me out for this. You said check down, not up. I didn't mean it like that. Then the Command Sergeant Major pulled him over towards the snack bar and laid into him for the next 15 to 20 minutes. I had never been happier while on the line. Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called HoseDatBirth911. It says, OP could only check one notch down. Not a lot of room to look when you're second from the bottom. OP responded and said, they still had me in charge of a couple E4s who got promoted about when I got demoted. They wanted results and did not mind ignoring rank for that. But otherwise, you are right. I was the only E2 I knew of at that point in the deployment. Even the new kids got promoted up. Alright, is anybody else here wondering what OP did to get demoted? Unfortunately, it's not part of the story, and I couldn't find it anywhere in the comments, but curiosity is really killing the cat here. The fact that OP as an E2 was willing to rattle the cage of an E6 might give you a little idea of why they were demoted though. Some people get real bold with their attitude right up until they need a hand and realize no one's stepping out of their lane to help them. This story comes to us from Illuminatus Prime. Here's my stay in your lane story. Long ago, before ChatGPT, before Reddit, and even before the internet, ARPANET doesn't count here. I was a college kid brought in as a part-time bench tech at a family-run appliance store. I did my job well enough to reduce their backlog of repairs to practically zero. Only those items awaiting new parts were still on my bench. Owner's daughter Jane, not her real name, ran the office. A really nice cutie. She could sell snow to the Eskimos. Owner hired a new salesperson, John, not his real name, who immediately took a shining to Jane and tried to monopolize her attention. When I took my psych classes, I learned he was likely a narcissist with BPD. One day, Jane went across the street for some donuts. I held the door open for her and offered to carry the box to the office. John immediately tells me to get back to work and to stay in my lane, or words to that effect, in front of Jane, the owner, and a couple of customers. Cue the Malicious Compliance. The next week, John escorts Jane across the street and comes back alone with not just one, but 3 boxes of donuts. Jane had another errand to run. I watch from across the sales room as John tries to pull the push door open. Of course, he fumbles the boxes which spill onto the sidewalk. The F is wrong with you? Why the F didn't you help me? That's not my lane, John, remember? Owner comes out, hears both of our stories, tells me to clean up the mess, and takes John into his office and closes the door. I was able to consolidate the donuts that hadn't hit the sidewalk into one box. The rest went to feed the dogs out by the dumpsters. Cue the fallout. Guess who got fired? The narcissistic bully boy woofing after the owner's daughter, or the part-time bench tech whose efficiency resulted in good customer service and a lot of buffer time. Clue? Not the narcissist. I picked up another similar job at the competition across town. Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called MichaelGum97. It says, I hope that you and Jane got together. Oh well. And really, isn't there a sign that tells you which way the door opens? Or was he one of those people who thought that reading was beneath him? OP responded and said, first sentence in the second paragraph after cue the malicious compliance, I watched from across the sales room as John tries to pull the push door open. And no, Jane and I never got together. I'm not sure which I'm more upset over in this story, the fact that OP got fired and the narcissist got to stay, or the fact that 2 full boxes of donuts got destroyed and fed to the stray dogs. Ugh, poor donuts. When you punish someone for being helpful, don't be surprised when they stop going the extra mile, literally. This story comes to us from Tony Twoshires. Clocking in too early? No problem. I'll show up later then. I used to work at a bank as a teller. It wasn't glamorous, but it was easy and convenient as I lived a hop, skip, and a jump away, a 5-minute walk, and you could see the bank from my house. As such, I was almost always one of, if not the, first person there. We were expected to be there by 7:15 to open at 7:30, but the managers tried to get there early, so we had time to set up, like log in, fill drawers, have a morning meeting, that kind of stuff. When opening for the day, you need at least 2 people for safety reasons, so one of which was usually me, and I was frequently arriving around 7, so the manager could unlock and we could set up. I had been clocking in after getting inside, which I guess was starting to add up, combined with the amount of times we have to stay past closing. I was told that there's only a 6-minute grace period for clocking in early or late, that I had clocked in early too many times, and that about 2 weeks of my punches would be adjusted. I said, okay, is this you specifically telling me to stop showing up early? They said, yes, it is. So I showed up at 7:20 every day. I stopped being there early. I stopped helping set up. I even took advantage of the grace period to be about 5 minutes late every day to make sure I didn't get stuck helping setting anything up. It sucked and it didn't work for anyone. We were frantically trying to open nearly every morning as most other employees didn't care about procedures, just their own drawers. One day, a few weeks later, a manager asked if I could come in earlier than usual to help with the alarm test. They were supposed to be done once a month, and for almost a year, I was the one who did them with the opening manager. Apparently, the test was supposed to get done that morning, but the other employee didn't show up early enough to start before we opened for the day. Sure, no problem. I was in by 7 the next morning and clocked in. It's sad to see we live in a world where trying to be efficient is seen as trying to game the system. Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called Retired BSN. It says, adjusting your paycheck is wage theft. Report it. You need to be paid for the time you put in. They can penalize you in other ways if early clock-ins continue, but they can't give you new rules and adjust past performance to go along with that. You know, it's funny, I just mentioned this in an episode a couple days ago where I said that Rick used to adjust our schedules anytime we came in early or left late, and he would just put them back to the regular time that we were supposed to be there or the regular time that we were supposed to leave. He'd say, you can leave early next day, and that would never happen. I just wish I had the balls back then to say something about it, but I was quite a bit younger than I am now and fairly new to the workforce, so I just let it happen. These days, that would never happen with me. Upper management had a brilliant idea until reality hit and one boss decided to follow their orders exactly as written. This story comes to us from Great Palpatine. Do we offer home deliveries? No, we don't. Another tale from my retail experience, this time featuring my boss versus higher management. Things are going relatively smoothly until one fine day, Manglement recently introduces the idea of introducing home deliveries. No doubt this had to do with a newly promoted manager to a key role in Manglement, whom we all knew has been coveting the position for years. Several people left after his ascent, always a bad sign, especially in retail. Brilliant idea in theory, terrible in practice. First time we do home delivery, we run into all sorts of logistical trouble. First, the goods don't arrive on time. Second, when they finally arrive, logistics messes up the delivery time. Some of the items are perishable, and so by the time delivery is scheduled and actually takes place, they are not as good as before. Third, the whole order can also be time sensitive because our customer needs it as soon as possible. What this means for our store is, boss has to send someone from our already short-staffed store to do the delivery, and it comes out from our store's own bottom line, and it comes along with a whole host of other workers' rights issues, which is too complex for me to get into. Anyway, the first delivery was a pain to deal with, and for her efforts, what did my boss get from the upper manglement? Terse but vague statements that don't mean anything, that she's responsible for the store and the staff, and to manage customer expectations moving forward. So, boss complies. We will indeed manage customer expectations. Imagine Manglement is going all out saying, we now offer home delivery. Our customers, many of whom are elderly or are busy adults caring for their elderly parents or dependents, arriving at our store excitedly with the expectation of home delivery. And we are actively managing customer expectations. Home delivery is available, yes, but it can take up to a month or even longer. Sorry, sir, we understand this is time sensitive, but based on past experience, we cannot guarantee a delivery date at this time. We highly recommend you take the most time-sensitive products home first. I'm going to complain. Many customers are rightly fuming. Apologies, we understand your frustration. If you'd like to give some feedback, here is Manglement's contact. Not long after, boss gets a call from Manglement asking what's going on with home delivery. We've managed customer expectations, as you asked, boss explains quietly but firmly. I wish I could hear what the response was on the other end of the line. It was also rumored that there was a meeting which all outlet bosses were invited to for discussion of this new policy, but I can't confirm this sadly. All I do know is that shortly after, Manglement stops pressuring my boss to offer home delivery, and the ads on home delivery at our store are quietly taken down. Also, new Manglement manager left for another unnamed position at suspiciously short notice, potentially another sign that he was probably behind this whole farce in the first place. Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called Mizinamo. It says, setting down expectations but not giving people the tools they need to fulfill them, a classic. Did manager think you could just teleport those items into people's homes without any logistics being involved at all? Yeah, I don't think management was thinking about what this would do to the store. If you need people to deliver stuff, that means you need extra people working at the store that can deliver stuff. You don't take from your already short-staffed store and send them out on the road, because then your store will suffer. Ask me how I know about that. Another thing from my time with Rick. And I know I missed it when I talked about Rick earlier, but I'll put it in here. Screw you, Rick. Screw you very much. When a new manager tries to control everything, sometimes the best move is to sit back, follow orders, and let their plan crash on its own. This story comes to us from Shadow17. Yes, sir, only as you say. My manager was new to the company, and I've been here over 18 years and pretty well run my area solo. We are a high-end production facility, and I'm part of the incoming quality and test engineering team. I always stay well ahead of production, along with performing my other tasks. I consult with the production and inventory supervisors daily to ensure I know what's on the horizon, and have anything they will need ready well ahead of time. I also get requests from the development engineering group to test new products during development. All this requires strategic planning and the ability to shift direction at any time to keep a flow going. In steps this new manager. We had issues from the first meeting. Seems he doesn't like being in a room where he isn't the smartest one there. So after a few weeks of getting to know the place, he sends an email. No one can alter OP's schedule without going through me first. I will set his priorities and work hours going forward. I knew exactly what this would do to my balanced flow. Sure enough, the next week, we had 2 product design qualifications and a customer surprise arrival to watch the testing. My manager left strict instructions that I was to remain on production material only. No one could get in contact with him. He had signed out as a work from home day, but he wasn't answering any of the numbers he had given. Turns out, they did eventually track him down at the local park with his kids, but not before the customer had left, mad and frustrated. The next week, he called me into his office, and he had the gall to try to write me up for not testing the product when the client arrived. I handed him a printed copy of his email and insisted that the write-up be witnessed by a member of the HR team. He reset the meeting for 3 days later, giving him time to prep the HR rep to his side of the story. First question she asked was why I didn't test the products when asked, and I handed her the email. I was told if I violated this new policy he created, I would be written up, so I followed it, and I'm still being written up. I would like to file a harassment complaint against this manager. His voice cracked as he stammered out, "Now, let's just slow this down a bit." The HR rep knew she couldn't ignore my charges, even if she didn't agree. The company requires all harassment claims to be investigated. The meeting ended there. The harassment claim was documented as a verbal warning. And for the last 2 years, he won't engage with me at all. He won't even let me know when we're having a staff meeting. I hear about it the next day from the others. Suits me, the less I see of him, the better. Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called AmbitiousRub2047. It says, I would file a new harassment claim as he would intentionally skip you from important meetings. Agree with this commenter, if OP is being left out from all of the staff meetings, there could be things being put into place there that they don't know about and will come back to bite them in the butt later. So yes, another complaint needs to be made that this manager isn't letting you know about staff meetings, so you really have no clue what's going on at your workplace. I'm sure HR would love to hear that and maybe talk to him again, and this time it probably won't be a verbal warning. This story comes to us from I Don't Want to Sign In, Clocking In. Used to work for a business office some ages ago. You clocked in by swiping a card on a time clock in the elevator lobby. Swipe out and in for lunch, etc. Pretty simple. You were paid in 3-minute increments, and so some people would come up a bit short or long with overtime by the end of the week. The reader machines took ages to register, so you had to stand there to be 100% certain you were clocked in or out. There could be very long queues. If you got more than an hour of overtime, you might get a talking to, but most of the time nobody said anything. Managers were also pretty chill about letting you come in whenever, as long as you were at your desk during hours where they let you call the patients. Then one day this mandate comes out, absolutely no overtime without VP approval. For the most part, nothing bad happens, except now managers have to be on your case if you're clocking in early and out late, and racking 30 plus minutes of overtime on any check. After a few months of people being no more particular about clocking in or out, a new directive comes down the pipe. No schedule changes whatsoever. Everyone is assigned a schedule and will stick to it for life. You must clock between 6 minutes before your start, no later than 3 minutes after. Flip that on the way out, 3 minutes early up to 6 minutes late. About 30 people started at 9 a.m., and so they would be queued at the punch clocks beginning at 8:54, and 2 to 3 of them would be tardy. I was one of the rare few that was allowed to be in at an abnormal time, 7:30, and didn't have to queue to punch in or out. I know math, and so do you. We've all got time to maliciously comply. 12 extra minutes, 4 days a week is 48 minutes. Then clocking in 6 minutes early on Friday gets you up to 54 minutes. Every Friday around 10 in the morning for almost 3 years, my manager walks over and orders me to clock out an hour early so that I will not get overtime. Every Friday she tells me, "You really can't be doing this," and every Friday I ask her if there's a new company policy, which always garners a sigh as she walks away. Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called UsedFlatworm6633. It says, worked retail in the 90s, same experience. I'd be sent home every Saturday after working half the day. No overtime, no problem. I've mentioned in the past couple of videos that I worked in a few places where they would try to give you time off in lieu of overtime. And in some of those places, you would just never get that time off because there'd be way too much work to do on the other days, and the boss, usually Rick, would say, "I need you here, you can't leave, sorry." Ugh, screw you, Rick. This story comes to us from Regex is easy. Cool, embarrass yourself the perfect way. Used to work in a startup as the lead developer managing a team of 8. I had this manager, calling him B from now, who had this long history of jealousy and in any occasion used to mention he used to be a programmer in his youth as well, and he knows much better than everyone. Believe me, he was a 50-year-old kid. At some point, our company got a project from one of the banks, with deadline of 2 months. The project was somehow complex mathematically but doable in 2 months with right choice of people and planning. I was explaining this in a mutual meeting with B and the CEO when B jumped in to speak. This is a serious project. Unlike other projects you're in charge of, I will manage this project personally and will hire new teams reporting directly to me. It's better if you do not get involved in such a serious project. Thing is, I had a successful experience in rich mathematical projects, and CEO got that project exactly because of its similarity with our other project, which involves some mathematics. I exactly knew what must be done there, but B, it was the best opportunity for him to embarrass himself. Perfect. I'll focus on our own products then, and you take charge of this project, I told to B in front of the CEO. B started interviews and asked me to participate. I helped him a bit, but it was a challenge for him to accept people I rejected just because they answered nonsense questions asked by him. Like, how many doors did you see coming to our floor? What was the color of the third door? Like, really? The project started, and after 1 month not hearing anything from them, I had a request from B. My team has done everything, but we need a little help. Can you give us these APIs to return some data? Told him to let me see our plannings to see if I can dedicate time for this. Then sent him a letter in our system like this. As per our discussion, our team can deliver the APIs in a short time. We just need you to respond to this letter with a short description of inputs and expected outputs of whatever API you need. It doesn't need to be lengthy, so we are ready to start as soon as we get the documents. No response was given, and I forgot about it until next month, when the deadline had been passed by a week. While shopping at a weekend night, I received a call from the CEO with the angriest tone I had ever heard, screaming, "Why haven't you given B the APIs? The project can no longer wait, and B says your team failed to give them what you promised." I responded, "Look, stop screaming and give me 5 minutes, and then you can do whatever is needed." "Okay, tell me." Search for this letter in the system from me to B at that time range. Open it, and then I'll continue. Found it. So B requested this last month. All he had to do was respond to this letter in 10 minutes, and I could have given him whatever he needed. But not only he didn't, he never again mentioned it in person as well. Got it. We'll call you back soon. 1 hour later, I called again to see why he didn't call me. CEO responded with, he and his team didn't do anything except some mock-ups for the bank. Not a single line of back-end code was written, and they were looking for a victim to blame. He didn't respond to you because he couldn't write. They need all the back-end to be fully implemented by you. Due to friendship B had with the CEO, he wasn't immediately fired, but next month he left the company on his own. During that month, his team was merged into my team. They were good people, despite previously being rejected by me. Just, they were not suitable for a 2-month deadline project. And I got the role of him right after. Still one of my best stories so far. Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called KCL67. It says, he effed around and found out. Sometimes the only way you can show that someone doesn't know what they are doing is to let them show it themselves. Another commenter down below called Equivalent Salary 357 said, a good manager doesn't need to be able to do the work, just to facilitate the work of the team and then stand out of their way. B failed that. A really good manager surrounds themselves with people that they think are smarter than them. People who can get the various parts of the job done, even if the manager doesn't know how to do them themselves, but has an understanding of how things work. Unfortunately, way too many managers out there bite off more than they can chew, tell people they can do things that they can't, and then just get screwed in the end when they aren't able to deliver. That's what happened to OP's boss, and that's what happens to a lot of bosses. Rip. This story comes to us from Zach in St. Louis, a coffee experience I witnessed firsthand. So I served 20 years in the Air Force, and this story is from 1996. We were an atypical unit where our mission was always deployed. Not airframe related at all, but rather like the Army. We all trained with multiple pew-pews, we trained in convoy protocols, we set up our equipment and covered it all with camouflage netting. We dug our own foxholes, we pulled our own security, etc. You get the idea. All of this was as a self-supporting unit, all designed to be operated outside any base if need be. We had about 250 people at any given time, and like any unit, not everyone took it seriously. This story happened on the first 3 days of a deployment to Denmark for a NATO Partnership for Peace exercise, which meant a 2-day convoy from our base. I didn't participate directly, but I heard firsthand from those who did as it was happening and heard and saw the fallout, which wasn't severe, but it was very satisfying for myself. I worked radar maintenance, and after all hands went on deck for our equipment setup on a cliff overlooking the North Sea, we split into 2 12-hour shifts for the rest of the deployment. I had known Andrew, a senior airman, who outranked me since we were both in technical school 3 years prior, and this assignment was our second assignment, and it was nice to have a friend in the new unit, especially since it was my first deployment. We were both on night shift, as was Andrew's girlfriend and future wife, Katie. Katie wasn't in our work center, but whenever Andrew and Katie had free time, they were together. We came off shift and hit breakfast, and Katie was complaining about getting reamed at shift change. Now, Katie's supervisor was a somewhat crusty master sergeant, and apparently he expected coffee to be ready by the time he arrived. Now, most of us in the service love coffee. We need coffee. The 6 of us working nights in our work center went through 1.5 30-cup percolators a night. Like, if you ever read a Jack Reacher book, his coffee preference was exactly what it was like. The problem was, Katie and the one coworker she had on nights didn't drink coffee, so they didn't think of making it, and they also didn't think they should have to make coffee for someone else when they got zero benefit. So that first breakfast after our night shifts began, they decided they would maliciously comply with the Master Sergeant's order to have coffee ready when he came on shift. The next night, they intentionally used the amount of coffee for a standard drip pot you'd use at home, despite every work center having the same 30-cup percolators. So when shift change happened, the first thing the Master Sergeant said was, "You better have coffee ready," and they both nodded and gave a yes sir and walked out the door, knowing they had made the weakest brown water tea that would be considered undrinkable, and it would take another 15 minutes of anger-induced waiting by the Master Sergeant to have a decent cup of joe that he'd still have to make himself. Both Andrew and I were laughing when they relayed this to us at breakfast. That afternoon at shift change, the Master Sergeant tore into Katie and her coworker, and she came over to vent to Andrew as soon as he was off shift. Apparently, he raged about half of his 12-hour shift because a couple different people on day shift told Katie how angry and grumpy he was. Well, Katie told us he yelled loud enough that others came to see if there was a fight once she told him they weren't coffee drinkers, so they didn't know how to use a percolator. He ended his second reaming with, "Figure it out," and stomped off. After venting and a hug and kiss from Andrew, Katie said she'd make him a stronger pot of coffee, with a much different smile than her normal one. It didn't look sarcastic, but it was twice as big as normal, and I realized she was going to enjoy what she was going to do. So she went and filled the percolator basket to the brim with coffee and turned it on. This was the beginning of a 12-hour shift, and as soon as it finished, she unplugged it and took it outside, and took the top off to cool in the chilly North Sea nighttime air. Once it was at room temperature, she refilled the basket to the brim, put the lid on, and took it inside to restart the percolator using the coffee that was already in it. She got 4 cycles in that night in between her duties, which were minimal as her system was rather new and much less labor intensive than ours, and we were using our night shift to train us new guys, so we had much less free time. Andrew and I found ourselves outside at shift change on purpose. We found a way to make ourselves busy and let the others do the shift briefing. About a minute or two after the master sergeant arrived, you could hear the faint shouting from across the dirt road and patch of field that separated our work center from the rest of the squadron. 2 minutes later, Katie and her coworker walked out with their heads down, and after about 20 paces, turned to see if anyone was still watching. Then, they started laughing hard enough to notice from just their silhouettes in the morning sun rising behind them. Katie came running to us and I stepped back and let her tell Andrew the story, which her coworker again relayed to me at breakfast. Here it is, still etched in my mind nearly 30 years later. The Master Sergeant practically kicked in the door to the 580 shelter that functioned as their mobile work center. He immediately went to the coffee pot and scowled, "This better be stronger than yesterday." Katie just replied, "It should be," and turned to walk out before being angrily told, "Wait." She was actually happy that he was already mad. He took a styrofoam cup and poured a dark black cup of coffee that looked like motor oil pouring out of an engine block that was several thousand miles past due for its change. It even had a faint burnt smell. He let out a "What's this?" and took a sip and turned and sputtered it out of his mouth, out the still open door of the shelter. Well, most of it went out the door, but some dribbled out and hit his uniform shirt and pants. Good thing brown is one of the woodland camouflage colors. He raged for half a minute and stomped back and opened the coffee percolator to see the grounds practically overflowing in the basket. He raged some more about wasting resources and ordered them out of his sight before he could do something he'd regret. After they walked out the door, he took his cup to toss out the undrinkable coffee and raged again at the amount of grounds at the bottom. And he still had to wait another 15 minutes to get a drinkable cup of joe. We were all outside the exercise wire before he could enjoy it. Well, Andrew and I were back outside as soon as the shift briefing ended that afternoon, waiting for Katie to come share the full fallout. Apparently, the Master Sergeant dropped the coffee percolator trying to empty it and was so mad he didn't speak the rest of his shift until the afternoon shift change briefing. But he told Katie and her coworker not to bother making coffee. She said good thing, because she had a fiber laxative she was going to put in the pot if she had to make it one more time. She said it with that same smile she had the first morning that made me decide I didn't want to get on her bad side. They all made up about it later, and the Master Sergeant even laughed about it during the post-deployment barbecue the night before we packed up to convoy home. Katie made sure she kept his beer stein full all night though, so it probably helped his mood. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, we have one from a user called Tremenda Carucha. It says, "I've got to hand it to Katie. Who needs an espresso machine when you can have a coffee that's strong enough to stand your spoon up in?" I think this is the reason why a lot of places have gone over to the K-Cup system because, yeah, it's got a lot of waste and it's not very environmentally friendly, but you can't really mess up putting a K-Cup in, adding water, and pressing a button. This story comes to us from Old Man Chubbs. Here's one that has probably never been heard. Years ago, I worked for a suburban police department, fairly small but average size for my state. Many people suspect that these smaller towns generate revenue off of tickets and citations, and that is generally true. My boss, the chief, was in his heyday, a go-getter, loved writing tickets, and therefore expected us to follow suit. I was a patrol supervisor, a sergeant, so I was expected to set the standard for the others to follow. One month, I'd been called in and counseled about my low stats. In other words, I wasn't writing enough tickets. Legally, they cannot tell a police officer to write tickets, and quotas are illegal, but your overall contacts, which include citations, written warnings, and arrests, can be used as a metric to judge performance. Mine were low, typically 20-ish tickets and warnings in an agency where most were writing 70 to 150 tickets a month. I didn't sign up to be a revenue generator though, and it didn't sit well with me to have to make someone decide between paying a stupid ticket for a broken headlight or feeding their family. Anyway, I was told that I needed to improve my contacts. "Yes, sir," was my response, knowing that he meant write more tickets, but couldn't tell me to write more tickets. So my contacts improved. Every single person I stopped that month, which if memory serves was around 40, got a written warning. No tickets, no revenue generated. The following month, after our stats had been compiled and posted on the wall of shame for all to see, I was called back into his office. "You wrote 40 warnings last month and no tickets," he said. "Yes, sir, that sounds about right," I replied. "And none of those deserved a ticket?" "Well, I used officer discretion, and in my opinion, none of them did." He was angry by this point and told me he knew the game I was playing. "I'm not playing a game," I told him. "You said my contacts needed to improve, so are they or are they not improved over the previous month?" "Oh yeah, they improved alright, you smart butt," he said. That was the last time I was hounded about stupid stats or contacts. Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have another comment from Tremenda Carucha. It says, "Kudos to you, Sergeant. That was brave and right." There are so many comments online, especially on Reddit, about people who absolutely hate police officers. And I do have to say, it's not all police officers that are the problem. There are definitely some police officers that are a massive problem, but it's not all of them. We can't put them all in that same bucket. OP in this story seems to be one of the good ones. They didn't want to give people tickets just for the sake of giving them tickets. So they gave them warnings and let them go on their way. That's the kind of officer that other ones should aspire to be. Alright, we'll end this one here. If you enjoyed this episode, I encourage you to follow us on your favorite podcasting platform. And if you're on YouTube, please hit that subscribe button and drop a like on the video. It really does help us out. I thank you for watching and listening. I hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll see you tomorrow.